Good evening, everyone. It's your favorite apostates. I am McKay.
I am Jordan.
And I am glad to see so many awesome people in the chat already. Shout out to everybody who is joining us live. If you are new here, of course, we call ourselves your favorite apostates, being that we are former Mormons, a topic that is going to come up
quite a lot.
Maybe just a little bit today.
Let me start out
and Jordan
by saying,
especially.
Let me start out by saying, before somebody comments it, there will be chapters on this video, and aka timestamps. I just moved the whole table. If you don't know what those are, if you hover your little mouse for the replay crew, if you hover your little mouse over the little bar where you can kind of scrub the video, there will be chapters in there, so you don't have to watch the whole video. You can just skip to the things that you want to see. You can just skip to certain parts of our commentary. All the timestamps will be in the description, so you can look in the description and decide which ones you want to watch. So that will be done immediately after stream. I will stay up and make it happen. So there you go. You don't have to watch the whole thing.
There you go.
Baloney is here.
Yes, Baloney, if you are new, Baloney is our free-range grass-fed cat. Kidding about the grass-fed part, but
kidding about the free-range part, really, too. He's trying to eat
free-range in our house. So yeah.
And I'm a therapist. He's an ex-Mormon. We're parents of a small child.
Yep, that's why we're going live now instead of when it happens, because I have a 3-year-old to chase around while all of this is going on. So
I have a master's degree in social work. I am a therapist. I work in Utah, and so I primarily see Utah-only clients. And so I work in the same spheres that the horrible Jodi Hildebrandt also has worked in, and I have personally seen the effects of her horrific choices. So
welcome, Melissa. Thank you.
Bear that in mind. We decided, since we've been getting some questions about the mental health aspects of this, we figured it would be important to touch on that. So I am going to talk about that, especially from like a therapist perspective and an education perspective on things like narcissism and lots of people throwing around the word sociopath, which I want to talk about. And so a few different things. But tonight we are going to watch the feed of the actual things. For those of you that haven't seen it yet, we're going to watch it. We're going to react to it. I have the statements that Ruby's family made included. I have some other anecdotal pieces of information that are important. And then I also included some information. We're going to watch the press conference that came out afterwards, because there were some really important things that were said after court itself by both attorneys and an additional person. And then we're going to talk about sentencing in Utah and why it's different and why each of them have a range for sentencing instead of a direct number. And then we're also going to talk about the prison that one or both of them, likely at least one of them, will be at, and kind of what it looks like, the relationship between that prison and the Mormon church, because shockingly to no one, there is a relationship there. So that is our plan. How does that sound, everyone?
Sounds good. Jordan has graced us with one of her famous PowerPoints.
I have.
So we love that. Just before we get started, thank you, Tinkerbell Bell, for the 10 gifted, and welcome to the 10 new members. We love it. I'm going to put a pause starting now until the end on thanking everybody. So stick around to the end if you donate or whatever,
and we'll
give you a shout out, or if you put a question in there or whatever, we'll get to it probably then.
Also, apologies, we will be eating during the stream because neither of us have eaten dinner. So we came straight here. And then shout out, did you shout out Tori already?
Oh, and shout out Tori. Grid
for 4 months.
Evening, everyone.
And make sure you like the video. There's lots of people that do this commentary, but we like to think that you like ours the most.
Some people I saw in the chat were saying they've been waiting since 11 a.m. their time.
Which I'm so honored.
Check this out. We are very honored. I'm
so honored. That's why we're trying to be very comprehensive, cover all kinds of things. And we can all be angry and frustrated about this together.
We're going to be raging. And I'm going to be raging if Baloney tries to knock my monitor off of...
Baloney.
I'm going to be kicking his ass out in a second here.
He's being a cheeky boy right now. Okay, so let's hop into this PowerPoint, shall we?
Let's.
Obvious trigger warning.
Do it.
As we talk about this.
Shout out for the jump scare. Woo.
Various things. Yes, right before our live went live. That sounds weird to say, but right before we published,
I guess it was a couple hours ago.
Not the original mugshot, but a mugshot that Ruby had, went live from a reporter. I think it was like KUTV.
On Twitter.
On Twitter. And this is from when she was transferred to the other prison to deal with the custody stuff that was going on. So this is not the original mugshot from when they were arrested that night, but it is one of the mugshots. And she looks very smug, in my opinion.
Very smudge and arrogant.
Very smudge.
I must say. What was I was going to add something. I'm being a silly goose. I can't remember what it was. So, this is what I was going to say. There is a Utah statute that, and it's a no nonsense one. You know, I applaud Utah for very few things. This is one of them. But they don't release mugshots until you are convicted of a crime or you plead guilty to a crime and are sentenced. So this is the first mugshot that's come out. We didn't get any booking mugshot from her or Jodi for that reason. That way, you don't have a mugshot tied to you if you weren't convicted of a crime or you didn't plead guilty to a crime. So. And
allegedly, more information is going to come out in the next 30 days, including their mugshots. So we will obviously keep you posted on that. Okay, so let's talk chat rules real quick, just so we can save our mods some time. If you're new here, few things. Don't use the first names of the minor children. Just abbreviate. They have absolutely no privacy, so let's afford them what privacy they have left. Chad and Sherry are adults. They're fair game to be discussed. They are over the age of 18. Don't disparage any of the victims, Sherry or Chad included. You'll be booted for that. Don't speculate on sexuality. Whether or not Jodi and Ruby were in a sexual relationship is largely irrelevant, and it contributes to other very problematic conversations tying like abuse and grooming and people in the LGBTQ plus community, and that is not necessary and largely inaccurate. So we're not going to speculate on that. And then we're not going to speculate or...
Not largely inaccurate. It's completely inaccurate.
Yes. Do not speculate or armchair diagnose anything mental health wise. We're not saying that somebody's a psycho. We're not saying that somebody's a sociopath. We can talk about behavior. We can talk about traits. We can talk about, that sounds like that's like narcissistic, or that's like, we're just going to discuss factual behavior. We're not going to give diagnosis. I, as a therapist, have a rule that I have to abide by, that I cannot give people I don't know and who are not my client's diagnosis. And that should apply to the rest of you as well. Because even I, as a qualified individual who can diagnose people as a therapist, I cannot do that to people who are not my clients. So we're just going to abide by that rule just because it's respectful for everyone, and we don't want to. We'll go into detail later on why that can be problematic. No calls for encouraging violence. Like, I know this is mighty frustrating and triggering for many of us. So I totally get that. If that's how you're feeling, that's completely valid. Just don't drop it in the chat because we don't want to cause any problems with YouTube.
Yeah.
And then don't argue with or harass the mods. The mods do this of their own free will and volition. We are not forcing them, but they do this out of their own goodness of their hearts.
And they are imbued with the power that we have given them, and ultimately I trust their judgment. So
indeed. Okay.
Whatever they have said, I'm probably going to agree with them, unfortunately.
Exactly. All right, let's hop into it.
Shout out to the mods. We love you, appreciate you. You're amazing. Awesome.
Okay, so we're going to react to the actual footage. We're going to start with Ruby's first because Ruby's was first. I watched these as they happened today, so we'll do that in the same order.
Yeah, mind you, I did not. I was going to the airport with the little one, and yeah, Jordan was in between clients, and
so it worked out.
I had not had time today to check this out.
So McKay's watching this all for the first time with all of you.
This is a live react right here.
We are going to pause as we go to point out things that I think are important, but we will try not to over pause.
That's through inspection.
You're going to have to play with audio, probably.
Yeah, let me bring this up real quick so I can see. Whoops, now I'm out of here.
On reflection, Ruby Franke has become a serious student of her own actions.
You're so precious to me.
This is just the first little intro.
The whistle tone is already sending me.
So just scrub till she's walking into the
I can't see where let's add the subtitles. I remembered right off the bat.
Thank you. Scroll forward a little bit because they did a little highlight at the beginning. Yeah, there we go.
Mr. Shum are here for the state of Utah, and we are ready to proceed with sentencing.
We are.
Yes, Your Honor. Counsel, The terms of the sentence were agreed to as part of the plea agreement, correct?
That is correct.
There is a pre-sentence investigation report in the matter. I have reviewed that. Everyone has seen it.
Yes.
What about restitution, counsel, before we move on with other matters?
We'd like to leave that open at this time, Your Honor.
How are we doing on audio, by the way? I'm looking at the levels. I just want to make sure it's okay.
I've seen no complaints yet.
Okay.
I can get into that. I might be more comfortable if we approach to get into that.
Is there an agreement that restitution, that we reserve that, and for what period of time?
8 months is what we're anticipating. But I haven't talked to the defendant's counsel about that.
We haven't discussed that, Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
No.
All right. What's the state's position regarding sentencing?
Your Honor, the state, I'll stand up. The state respectfully requests that the court sentence Ms. Franke to consecutive prison terms for each of the 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. This sentence was agreed to by Ms. Franke in her plea agreement and is also recommended by adult probation and parole. She committed horrible acts of child abuse. From May to August in 2023, Ms. Franke and her business partner held her 2 children, ages 9 and 11, turning 12, in a concentration camp-like setting. The children were regularly denied food.
That is like really kind of on
verbiage.
the nose verbiage. I mean, concentration camp is pretty, you think the worst of the worst. And
Water, beds to sleep in, and virtually all forms of entertainment. They were isolated from others and were hidden when people came to visit the house where the children and the defendants were staying. The children were forced to do physical tasks like carrying loaded boxes up and down stairs and wall sits or sitting against a wall without a chair or a stool for hours at a time. They were also forced to do manual labor outdoors in the extreme summer heat, at times without shoes or socks. They were forced to stand outside on a cement patio in the summer heat for hours and even days at a time. They were beaten, and the 12-year-old was regularly bound hand and foot after he attempted to run away in mid-July. Both children had extensive physical injuries from the abuse.
The prosecution's to answer the questions in the chat. This is the prosecution that's talking right now. So this is the representative for the attorney for the state of Utah that's talking about the crimes that she's committed.
we've gone over this, but they're just, rehashing it.
Required hospitalization when they were found. The injuries from the binding to the 12-year-old are particularly awful. In addition to physical abuse, the children were emotionally abused to the extent that each believed, to some degree, that they deserved what was being done to them. Had the older of the children not had the courage to run away and ask a neighbor to call the police, heaven only knows how much longer he could have survived in that situation. After being caught, Ms. Franke has shown considerable remorse, as evidenced by agreeing to serve consecutive prison terms and being willing to cooperate with the state against Ms. Hildebrandt. However, given the severity of the abuse she inflicted, consecutive terms are appropriate in this case. As the court's aware, Section 76-3401 lays out factors the court takes into account in determining whether consecutive or concurrent sentences should be imposed. Those factors are the gravity and circumstances of the offense, the number of victims, and the history, character, and rehabilitative needs of the defendant. As agreed to in the plea agreement and as recommended by adult probation and parole, consecutive sentences are appropriate. This is due to the severity of the abuse to both victims. It could be argued that Ms. Franke should receive a lesser sentence than Ms. Hildebrandt because of her remorse and willingness to cooperate with the state. However, the Board of
I beg your pardon?
Yeah.
and Parole will have broad latitude and will be able to take those facts into account when it determines how long each of the co-defendants will remain incarcerated. In conclusion, we respectfully request that the court go along with what was agreed to in the plea agreement and is recommended by adult probation and parole and impose consecutive sentences.
Thank you. Anything else from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Winward?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Some people are asking how she curled her hair. I think Ruby has naturally
yeah.
curly hair. And there are ways, I mean, women learn things in prison.
In jail.
In jail.
I think her hair
Soon
is
to
just
be
naturally
prison.
curly.
Yeah.
I don't think they would have anything really.
So this is Ruby's lawyer that's about to speak.
So he recommended like a lesser sentencing.
Solely, from my understanding, on the basis that she cooperated with the plea agreement. That if things would have gone to trial, that she would have testified against Jodi. And so on that principle, like from a legal aspect, I can see why, yes, from that standpoint, they would say maybe she deserves a lesser sentence because she offered the state something in return. But from a moral standpoint,
I would hardly call taking a plea deal like cooperating with the state. In my opinion, that is just avoiding going to trial and having everything put on blast.
But that's what
my
she got.
Very uneducated opinion. I don't even really know a lot of the shit that's going on screen. Anyway.
Okay,
are we ready to
let's
go?
hear from Mr. Winward.
Mr. Winward. Miss Frankie's counsel.
Good morning. In my few comments this morning, and in the comments my client wishes to make in a few minutes, we are not suggesting, nor are we asking that the court deviate from the stipulated sentence contained in the written plea agreement. I want the court to know that through introspection and reflection, Ruby Franke has become a serious student of her own actions. In the very early days of my involvement with Ruby, she was somewhat defensive, and she was still very much indoctrinated into a philosophy that was destructive. Fortunately, Ruby came to the stark realization of the errors in her thinking patterns and subsequent actions. To say that she was horrified by this realization would be to put it mildly. I have marveled at how quickly Ruby abandoned her defensive stance and moved toward her total acceptance of her actions and to her sentence today.
Which, in her position, is there really a lot of room for anything else?
There's
you either live in complete denial, which is still an option, or like you would just accept it and move forward. Like those are her two options, really.
And I mean, it is interesting that they are taking the victim stance. I can understand it because in a way she was a victim of Jodi, but there is something to be said about how high demand groups and cults are able to keep people in is because they are always going to be just below the boiling point on things. They'll take it far enough to where there's a little bit of pressure and uncomfortability, and then once they kind of get that stuff under their control, they can take it a step up. But like how far do you have to have gone to the point where Jodi is like, we need to straight up abuse these children, and you're like, okay. Yep. Like at some point, like you have to have been open to that at some. This is purely speculation on my part, but it feels to me that a lot of parents, and I'm sure a lot of people in the chat would agree with me, that abusing your children is a hard stop no matter what. Like you would never put any group or other person above your children and taking care of your children. So I feel like, I mean, Jodi was there and Jodi did a lot of the pushing, but Ruby allowed herself to be pushed really far. So
just wait till you hear her statement.
All right.
So far, she has used her time in jail to unwrap the layers upon layers of deceit and deception foisted upon her over the last 4 years by an unscrupulous individual. Ruby realizes that she still has work to do in shedding those thinking errors and to reestablish a better and correct pattern of thinking and behavior. Ruby realizes that changing her thinking, reestablishing relationships, and healing are not simple or easy tasks. However, she is committed to doing that work. I would like the court to know that Ruby Franke is a delightful, respectful, and responsible person. She is open to feedback and addressing the consequences of her actions head on, and now ready to address your honor and accept your judgment. Thank you, Judge Walton.
Thank you. Ms. Franke has a statement she'd like to make.
She does.
Okay, buckle up, buckle in. She gets really whiny and cryy at the end of the statement, and so if you can't understand what she says, never fear. I have the written version, so I can read it to you.
Judge Walt.
You don't have to bend down.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, that's why it's so damn loud.
I would like to make a
have it
statement without any intent to change my stipulated sentence. For the past 4 years, I've chosen to follow counsel and guidance that has led me into a dark delusion. My distorted version of reality went like...
We're 7-8 seconds into the speech and she's already said the D word. You have spent how much time
Alarm bells
in connections, and then you go and drop distorted. Get real with me right now.
Be for real.
Do you think she would want the furthest possible thing she could be away from that word?
Did her counsel not proofread this?
He said it too.
That's incredible to me that they are so dense that they would not be like, yeah, maybe we should, when you're trying to paint a picture that you were victimized and you were taking advantage of, maybe let's steer away from the vernacular that you were upfront and you were peddling to people while you were, she wasn't even just a victim. She was also a part of the leadership. She was at the helm of the ship. She was there with Jodi.
All the time too.
She was getting the special treatment that she so craved. That's fucking crazy.
Unchecked as I would isolate from anyone who challenged me. I was led to believe that this world was an evil place, filled with cops who control, hospitals that injure, government agencies that brainwash, church leaders who lie and lust.
That took me off guard immediately.
Okay.
Church leaders who lie and lust. That is very specific.
Because when I was seeing the cops thing, not very in line with Mormonism.
No.
The doctors thing, not very in line with Mormonism. But the government's thing,
there
are a lot of right-wing Mormons who would also agree with that sentiment
and fall into more
line.
extremism.
But now we're getting to the schism where it seems like they had a problem with the mainstream church.
Yes.
And the leaders,
and we've said
for
that
some reason. Interesting.
So, that's what I want to know is
maybe it's because she didn't get Jodi wasn't getting the preferential treatment as soon as she wasn't part of the LDS Family Services therapy pool.
We'll talk later on why people attribute things like narcissism and narcissistic traits to Jodi, because a sense of feeling like you're special and entitlement is a trait. And so this is potentially a good example of Jodi's always I want to be in with church leadership, but as a woman, I'm never going to get that opportunity. So I have to make my own way. I have to forge my own path because it's not going to happen in the traditional sense.
And just to bring up a reminder to people, these splinter groups of Mormonism, I'm not going to say all of them. There are people who are not freaks, but a lot of these splinter groups have issues with extreme behavior. The FLDS, especially the Warrenite, Warren Jeffs, the Jeffsite sect, you look at all the stuff that was going down with them. They split off because the church decried polygamy because of mounting legal issues from the federal government regarding their practice of polygamy. So they split off from the mainstream church, and look how they ended up. And then also you see people like Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell who also believed that the church was an apostasy, that prophets and apostles who were leading the church were not leading it the way that God wanted them. And we can see that they murdered people straight up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting how these kinds of things happen. Whoops.
Husbands who refuse to protect and children
Husbands who refuse to protect.
Abused. My choice to believe and be
Wait, is she really out here alleging that her husband wasn't?
No. She's saying that this is what Jodi convinced her, was that Kevin wasn't doing that, but she turns the tide on Kevin. Just give her a minute.
This paranoia culminated into criminal activity for which I stand before you today ready to take accountability. Jodi Hildebrandt was never my business partner, nor was I ever employed by her. I have
Stop the cat, bro.
She's discrediting that they were ever business partners.
What are we even talking? I would love to see bank statements. Oh my God.
never received wages from her or connections. Jodi was employed as my son's counselor in 2019, and in 2020 I paid her to be my mentor.
So just to clarify, she's saying that she was never paid by connections. She was never paid by Jodi, never got a dime from either of them, despite being very much a part of the organization. We knew that Jodi was Chad's therapist, but she's also saying that she paid Jodi to be her mentor. So if they were not only besties, but she was paying her for that.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
That is also assuming that Jodi was practicing her business to the degree that the law would require, and that she's not doing anything shady or under the table. But obviously, I mean, she's living in her house.
She was on the website.
She was on the website. You're telling me you weren't taking any money or anything as what do you call that? Compensation?
And it's hard to see because Long Crime has their lower thirds take up so much, on the live stream, which we're not watching right now, but I don't think it shows them. But Chad and Sherry and Kevin are all in the courtroom. And then apparently Bo, which is Ruby's brother, was sitting next to Sherry. I wasn't able to confirm that one, but I saw the three of them together. And so Chad and Sherry and Kevin were all in the courtroom today.
It is important to me to demonstrate my remorse and regret without blame. I take full accountability for my choices, and it is my preference that I serve a prison sentence.
Preference? I don't know about preference.
Girly, I don't think you get a choice in it now because you did sign the plea deal. So
thank you to the officers in Santa Clara and the Ivan City Police, Nick Hellman, Brian Palufo, Cy Pickuvit, Mike Pondoyo in Tobler, John Ward, D. Lewis, and Chief Flowers. You were the angels who came and saved my children. I especially want to thank Detective Jay Bate. She plucked me out of a situation I didn't know how to get out of. And the moment
So she is fully leaning into the victimization narrative now, which I'm not going to say is not partially true, because I think we can acknowledge that she did fall victim to some of Jodi's tactics, I do believe. But she is fully in victimization mode of thank you for arresting me, and you are the angels who, if you weren't beating the shit out of your kids, none of us would be here. It's really that fucking simple. Really.
Simple as that.
It's really that simple. And so this whole award show nonsense of let me name all the police officers, what are you on about? They don't like you. What else do you want from them? You shouldn't have been doing this. I don't understand why this is so hard for her to wrap her head around. But this is it's giving influencer apology. And you'll see that as we continue to go.
I'm just waiting to hear the fucking shoe in the dryer at this point.
Right, get off the stage. This isn't the Oscars. What are you doing? Anyway, keep going.
Joanne said, is this an Oscar speech?
Literally.
She is giving a speech because this is her receiving her stupid prize for playing stupid games.
Yep.
Handcuffed me was the moment I gained my freedom.
She's
saying trying to be a poet.
When she was arrested, that's when she gained her freedom.
Come on. This isn't slam poetry night at the local cafe.
Not the controlling ones. I was. Thank you to the medical staff at Intermountain Hospital.
That took care of my kid who was harmed by myself and my accomplice.
Tenderness and professionalism helped to heal my children. Jodi and I inflicted the injuries.
Could have been you.
Not the hospital. Thank you to DCFS, the Children's Justice Center, Judge Basil, and other key...
This might be the first time ever DCFS has ever been thanked for anything.
Seriously. Thank you, DCFS, for coming to my house around 15 times over like 4-year period, and so that I could practice and have my kids practice their acting skills and saying that there was nothing wrong or anything going on.
You can see,
you,
so this is a really good shot. You can see Kevin, Mr. Worldwide, bald ass head right here. You got Chad there, and then Sherry on the left.
Adults, you've gathered my children under your wing and offered them love, compassion, encouragement. You were not the ones who were doing the brainwashing. Thank you to my Bishop Tom Hawks and my state president Jim Nelson for reminding me of the Lord's love for the lost.
Oh, dear God.
So much pain and suffering would have been avoided had I followed and heeded your counsel. I was the one who was deceived, not you. Thank you to the Washington...
Very intentional, in my opinion, to make... I mean, this is almost giving, like, making amends to church leaders that she no doubtedly was antagonistic towards.
Kind of epic. Hit it right on the nose where I'm thinking, please don't excommunicate
Literally.
me. That's what it sounds like to me, because now she's like, oh, shit, I need to
That's my thought. This is her intention as part of her narrative is going to be getting back into the church teachings, blah, blah, blah.
I think that would be very useful for her sentencing in the long run.
Especially for the parole board that probably it consists of LDS members who live in Utah. There's something to be said there.
Will she be excommunicated for this? It is pretty likely, usually in a case where somebody commits a violent crime and is charged with a felony.
They'll at least be disciplined.
Usually be disciplined, and most of the time they'll just excommunicate him because, especially in a very public setting like this, the church doesn't want the association.
Will you go grab our food?
So a lot of times they will.
It's going to be cold by the time we get through this.
It's already cold.
It is, but I would rather eat it now than later.
I want to hear this though. Is the thing. I don't want it to play.
She's still gonna go on for a long time.
I'm also relishing in
oh my gosh,
the
I'll
cope.
just go get it.
Okay, thank you.
County Prosecutor's Office, Ryan Sham, the legal assistants and discovery clerks. Eric Clark, you exemplified to me how justice and mercy are meant to coexist. My charges are just. They offer safety to my family, accountability to the public, and they did show mercy to me. Thank you to my attorney, Lamar Winward, and his staff. I would not be where I am today without them. Thank you to Randy Kester for your limitless energy in healing my family. My dear friends.
Randy is the judge, if I'm not mistaken.
No, Randy is Kevin's attorney.
Oh, Kevin. Oh, yeah, okay. There's a lot of names here, and I'm not too hot with all that.
That's Mr. Worldwide's attorney. Yes, it's in here.
Okay. Allow me to play the smallest violin for you. Okay.
Pam and Roy, I'm so sorry for letting you down.
Pam!
Pam!
Yeah, you thought we were done with Pam? No, she apologizes to Pam.
And Pam's apparently... Pam was catching all kinds of strays, but I don't know. Pam doesn't sound like a great person either. I don't know. I have nothing to corroborate that.
Because of your association with me, your innocence was called into question. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, Kevin's family, my cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and neighbors, you all saw the warning signs long before I did, and you did what you could. You wanted to help, but I pushed you away.
Pause real quick. Pam was an employee, allegedly, at Connections. She was on the Connections website. She was also where the 2 younger daughters were found when all of this went down.
In American Fork?
In, like, American Fork. They were at Pam's house. And so there was that footage of them getting the girls from Pam's house. And so Pam is very much involved in this, in my opinion. I don't think, I mean, she didn't catch any charges, but she's not innocent in my eyes.
She's really involved with Jodi. I'm sure she is just the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
My mother and father, I have been utterly wretched to you. You have offered me unconditional love, and for that I have offered you unconditional contempt. My siblings and their spouses, because of my decision to roll around in a pigsty, I have dragged your families through the mud in public. Yet, when I desired to return as the prodigal sister, unlike the prodigal's brother in the
her
sister,
her high school English teacher is probably so proud of her.
Prodigal sister. There is so much Mormonism woven through this, and apologizing not because you've hurt your siblings' feelings, but you know that all of them have family channels and all of them are catching major flack for you.
Super. I mean, even the one sisters, people were out here speculating because some fucking washed up family vlogger was like, oh yeah, they were like swinging between siblings and all this shit. And look how that has never resurfaced because it's a outright lie.
Bible, anyway. You seemed stuck with my parents and ran out to greet me. Your capacity to love is unprecedented. Kevin, my husband of more than 23 years.
This is where she loses it.
You are the love of my life.
Down the drain, baby.
So sorry to leave to you to finish what we both started together. The ending of our marriage is a tragedy. It really wrapped around my heart in a knot I'll never be able to undo. To my baby.
Do we need a recap?
You can't see in this, obviously, because you can't see Kevin, but allegedly Kevin was shaking his head and crying. And I can only imagine his position. I'm not a fan of him either. I don't think he's innocent in this in any way, but this is a woman that you married with absolutely no... I mean...
Yeah, and she turned into a monster.
And so I'm not saying that he did not have his role in it, because he absolutely did, but I can see looking back at 20 years of marriage and going, how the hell did I end up here with my wife in prison? And now I'm potentially going to raise these children alone.
Yup.
My 6 little chicks. You were part of me. I was the mama duck who was consistently watering you to safety.
Can we stop with the animals?
I can see now. Over the past 4 years, I was in a deep undercurrent that led us to danger. I never ventured to darkness knowingly. I was so disoriented that I believed dark was light and light was wrong. I would do anything in this world for you. My willingness to sacrifice all for you was masterfully manipulated into something very ugly. I took from you all that was soft and safe and good. I took from you your mother. How terrifying was...
She sounds like the Charlie Brown teacher.
I could barely understand her at this point.
This is, I feel like...
I can reread the statement.
I feel like the closed captions are doing a decent enough job. Are we all getting the...
She talked about being mama ducks and she's supposed to keep them safe and unknowingly leading them into darkness and confusing right and wrong. Yeah, I can reread it once she's done. There's not that much left.
It must have been for you. I'll never stop crying. You're hurting your tender souls. You're so precious to me. I'm sorry. My choice to live in fear of the world has created a great vulnerability and a blind spot for me, where I have broken hearts and I've caused people to suffer and I have betrayed sacred trust.
That's true.
Watching my community respond to my charges with justice and mercy and grace and love There's all no evidence to know how wrong I've been.
Holy moly.
This world is full of really good people. And finally, I'm sorry for twisting God's word and distorting his doctrines.
Oh my
This is what I thought was
God.
interesting.
With the word again.
I'm apologizing for twisting God's words and distorting his doctrine. And so to me, this is absolute recognition of she knows that the things that she was doing was not in line with traditional Mormonism. And they were going down a path. They were absolutely going down a path. And we said it how many times? This is going to go extreme. This is going to go Chad and Lori. This is bad. Like, she was so lost in it, allegedly, by her own admission, that she didn't know right from wrong.
My greatest desire is to stand in his court someday spotless and confident.
Yeah, good luck with that one, babe.
Yeah. I think the best way to be able to do that is not harming his other children. Mm-hmm. Although he doesn't really stay his hand from that.
Judge Walton, I know that standing before you today is a necessary step towards that end.
She's immediately stopped crying now.
As soon as she's addressing the
clear
judge.
as day. I can understand everything she's saying.
Okie dokie.
Thank you to you and your staff for facilitating my opportunity to take accountability and to answer for my charges. I am humbled and willing to serve a prison sentence as long as it takes to continue unraveling all of the misinformation
Babe, you're willing? Doesn't matter if you're willing or not. They're dragging you there or you're walking there. It doesn't matter. You're acting like you got a choice here.
I believed and bought, swallowed, and acted out. And for my family to heal and for the community to heal. And I understand this is going to take time. I'm committed to continuing my learning until all of my toxic layers are shed, and I am ready to re-enter as a contributing member of our beautiful society. Thank you, Judge Walton.
Thank you for your statement, Ms. Franke. Anything else, Mr. Winward?
Damn.
No,
That was wild.
All right, so what do we think? Ruby's statement.
Does
Does anybody want me to read the latter half about her kids
If
again?
you had to get a rating for me, it would be 2 thumbs way down. Just kidding. Yes, people were saying reread the last little bit, probably starting where she's talking about Kevin. Do you have it pulled up right now, or do you need me to give you a minute to get it?
I got it.
Get it going. Take a moment, chew it up. Jordan's a faster reader than I, so I'll let her take it away.
So this is the part that was really hard to understand. To my babies, my 6 little chicks, you are a part of me. I was the mama duck who was consistently waddling you to safety. Well, I mean, I don't know about that because she doesn't even feed her own kids, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
In context, it's fallen a little flat.
I can see now that over the past 4 years, oh my gosh, I was in a deep undercurrent that led us to danger, which to me, it's like, does she appear remorseful? In appearances, yes, but I was in a deep undercurrent that led us to danger. That doesn't say I willingly made choices that landed us here.
We were all in this together, and you are included in that.
She says, I would never have led you to darkness knowingly. I was so disoriented that I believed dark was light and right was wrong. I would do anything in this world for you, except emotionally attend to you and take care of you. I added that in, by the way. My willingness to sacrifice all for you was masterfully manipulated into something very ugly. My willingness to sacrifice all for you. My willingness to not bring my kindergartner her lunch when she forgot it. Yeah, that doesn't sound like you'd sacrifice all. You weren't willing to sacrifice some fucking gas money, Ruby.
Oh, but she's willing to lay her life down on the hill and crucify herself on the hill of Low featuring T-Pain by Flo Rida. Anyway.
Yeah, I remember that whole meltdown. I took from you all that was soft and safe and good. I don't necessarily agree with that.
No, she did do that. because Chad had to sleep on a beanbag.
That's true. That was a soft thing that he got taken away. I took from you your mother. How terrifying this must have been for you. I will never stop crying for hurting your tender souls.
Good.
You are so precious to me. I'm sorry.
Womp womp.
My choice to live in fear of the world has created a great vulnerability and a blind spot for me, where I have broken hearts and I've caused people to suffer and I have betrayed sacred trust, which I agree with. Watching my community respond to my charges with justice and mercy and grace and love is all the more evidence to me of how wrong I've been. This world is full of really good people. Are you talking about your lawyer? Because you're paying him to do that job.
Yeah,
he doesn't do that out of the goodness of his fucking heart.
I would love for her to point out any sort of like
It's her
Ruby
family,
8
I'm
passengers
pretty sure.
apologists out there, because wow.
It's her family, because her parents wrote a statement about her
Okay, we'll hear about that more.
that we're going to cover also. But go ahead and finish this.
Awesome.
So now you can see what happens at the end.
Awesome.
We'll
Okay.
get to the sentencing.
Your Honor.
Anything else prior to
Hold
the
on. Sorry. I muted this.
court imposing sentence?
No, Your Honor.
The sentence will be that Ms. Franke serve 4 counts, 4 1 to 15-year sentences based on her convictions for 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. Again, they will be served consecutively pursuant to the parties' agreement and the applicable statute. Under the applicable statute, the court finds that that consecutive sentences are appropriate.
Hell yeah, they
Ms.
are.
Franke, the last thing I do need to tell you is that you have only 30 days to file or to perfect an appeal of any errors of the court by
Ruby waived her right to appeal, so this doesn't
filing
apply.
a written notice of appeal with the clerk of the court. If you don't do that within 30 days, you will lose your right to appeal. You also have the right to the assistance of an attorney on appeal and to have one appointed if you cannot afford to hire your own. Restitution, as agreed by the parties, will remain open for a period of 8 months. Any of the parties can bring that matter back before the court within that period of time. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. The
Okay.
next matter before the court is State of Utah versus Hildebrandt, case 231501.
That's Jodi's lawyer that stood up towards the end. So here's what I'll say about the
We're ready.
sentencing. Will you open my PowerPoint and go to the, you're going to have to go past Jodi's and past the statements. Keep going. Okay, go back one.
Oh, here we go.
So everybody has questions about the sentencing because it's a range. So here's what I'll say about Utah sentencing and the way that Utah operates. Utah has what's called indeterminate sentencing or indiscriminate sentencing. I think it's indeterminate. I don't remember.
Indeterminate sounds right.
So anyway.
It's right there.
So
Indeterminate sentencing.
this means that the judge doesn't decide the sentencing in its entirety. The Board of Pardons and Parole does. So they will go before the parole board, which will decide the ultimate length of time that they're going to serve in prison. So at minimum, both of them will serve 4 years. That is at minimum, no exceptions, right? They're also going to get credit for time already served since both of them have been in jail since October. That time counts towards the time that they're going to be doing.
September.
Yeah. I don't remember.
It was August 30th. I think.
August 30th, September. So they already have time for credit served. So we thought there was a 60 max, but according to Utah law, it's, if you go to the next slide, I think I have it on there.
It says it right here.
Go to the next one anyway. So if a court imposes consecutive sentences, the aggregate maximum of all sentences imposed may not exceed 30 years imprisonment. So even though they have that as a max for these charges, because they're serving these charges consecutively, neither of them are going to spend more than 30 years in prison maximum. So 30 years is going to be the max for both of them. And with how Ruby is being received, I don't know that she's going to serve more than the minimum sentence because of kind of the perception that's been going around right now. So will you read what it says at the bottom there?
Let me move our camera so it we can see. Whoopsie. Or let me just hide it for a second. Here we go.
I don't know about the enhanced credit. I just know that they do get credit for it. That's a good question. I don't know if it's different in the U.S. I thought it would just be time off, not like time and a half, but that's a good question. That would be a Natalie question.
It says within 6 months of commitment to prison, the board will set an original hearing date for an offender. One exception, inmates who are sentenced to death or life without parole by a court are not given an original hearing.
So from my understanding, within 6 months of them being in jail, they're going to have a hearing date where these things will be discussed. And the parole board will take into account a few things. They take into account the pre-sentence investigation that's already been done. They take into account statements from families, statements from victims, like past criminal history, time served, literally the time of day. I learned this today that like parole board hearings are impacted based on when your case is heard in the like morning versus in the afternoon.
Oh, are they like
Because people are
more
in a better
graceful
mood
in
after
the
they've eaten.
beginning? Oh.
Or vice
That's
versa. I might
interesting.
have that wrong, but I thought that was interesting.
I feel like people would be more graceful right when they get there and right after lunch, and then they would be less graceful right before
If they're
lunch and
hangry.
right when they're supposed to leave.
Right. So there's a lot of factors that are going to go into this, what they decide, but ultimately both of them are going to have to go before the parole board, and people can be invited to this. This is public. So people will be allowed
Field
to
trip?
go.
I'm just kidding.
Right. Like, I don't know if you have to have a special invitation, but like victims are notified. Like if, Kevin will probably be notified if he's the guardian of the children at the time. And so you also can have people speak at these parole hearings, like, and give statements. So like people talked about Jodi Hildebrandt, Jodi's niece, nibbling. I can't remember what we call it.
Yeah, nibbling.
And she wasn't able to give a statement today because she is not a victim in this particular case. And so their like victim statement wouldn't be heard because it doesn't apply because they weren't a victim in this specific case. But they could go to the parole hearing and say, this was my experience with Jodi. And then the parole board could take that into account. So that's why no statements were given to Jesse today. I know that was a question that I saw a lot, is why weren't there anything from them? And that's why. And so that's the sentencing. Does anybody have any questions about that? Yeah. So basically at minimum 4, no more than 30.
Yeah. Despite being sentenced on 4 counts to 1 year minimum, 15 maximum served consecutively, the maximum overall in the state of Utah is 30, regardless of whatever the sentencing was, unless they were sentenced to life without parole or sentenced to death.
Which obviously those
Which
wouldn't
is,
apply.
yeah.
So and
Utah
remember,
still does death sentence by firing squad.
it's true.
Fun fact.
Remember that the parole board, as part of Ruby's plea agreement, agreed to not interfere when she came up for parole. So the Utah Department of Corrections investigation, all those people will not interfere at all with Ruby's, her trying to get parole and trying to get out. Like, that was a condition of her plea agreement for going against Jodi. Jodi is not going to be afforded the same thing, from my understanding. And so, especially since her pre-sentence investigation is going to include past activity where she, got her license taken away and things of that nature. So at minimum 4 years, not taking into account time that's already been served.
Yeah, it's looking like 4 years is probably likely. I really don't want this to be the case, but unfortunately, knowing that the judge is pretty likely Mormon, we didn't have an exact, for sure, we know dead to rights that the guy is Mormon, but it's pretty likely. He lives in Washington County, and Washington County is primarily white and Mormon. But a lot of time, well, I guess it doesn't really even matter if it's him, but the board, there's probably
the judge isn't on the board.
Yeah, the board, there's probably an overrepresentation of people who are Mormon on the board.
Yeah.
And Mormons, just as a principle, are biased toward forgiving people of their trespasses, especially when they show remorse and repentance, what people would call godly sorrow. Now, I am of the belief that you cannot experience godly sorrow when the authorities catch you in the act.
Yeah.
That's just me, but that could play a part into how they are going to decide. So
let's go back to where things get really interesting is Jodi's hearing. Well, actually, do we want to talk about the statements her family made real quick? Go next.
I guess.
So
if they're in regards to just Ruby,
but this is her parents.
Okay,
her parents
that's
wrote
fine.
This. So I thought this was really interesting because this shows the kind of evolution of the relationship between Ruby and her parents. So as part of sentencing, people can write statements and things, and so Chad and Jennifer, which are Ruby's parents, decided to. So their statement is as follows: we are Ruby Franke's parents. We are currently serving a full-time mission in Serbia. Because
hold on, sorry.
What? Oh, it's not on screen.
I'm putting it on screen for everybody.
Before Ruby became involved with Jodi Hildebrandt, which is spelled wrong, which I thought was funny, she was a wonderful mother, daughter, sister, and member of the church. Interesting highlight.
Is that
why
spelled
I wanted
wrong?
to bring this right.
Oh, with
it's a
the
with a
Y.
Y.
Okay, I was like, Hildebrandt's right.
All she ever wanted from the time she was a little girl was a family to love and nurture. When she began having troubles with her teenage son, Chad, she sought out a family therapist/counselor to help them. We noticed a shift in Ruby's thinking the summer of 2020, and by the fall, she had cut ties to us, her siblings, and close friends.
I find it really funny that they describe her as a therapist/counselor because she hasn't been that since mid-2010s.
I don't find it amusing that they decided to throw Chad under the bus. For 3 years...
No, that's not cute.
What brief communications we had with her, she accused us of either things that never happened or she grossly exaggerated the events that did. She was delusional. She was so deeply brainwashed we could not recognize her. We received a postcard from Ruby 2 months after the terrible news of the children. We read her tender apology and humble acceptance of accountability. I know.
That is so corny.
She expressed her gratitude for being incarcerated and felt the mighty wake-up call was a huge blessing. Since then, we have seen a return of the Ruby we once knew. Her thoughts and views are her own now. Her love, appreciation, and commitment to her family is stronger than it has ever been. Ruby is more concerned about her eternal salvation than her imprisonment. Her testimony of the Savior and his atoning power means everything to her. As her mother and father, we plead with you to show her as much mercy as you possibly can.
No thanks.
Hopefully, in time, she will have a relationship with her children, and they will remember the mother she once was to them and will find it in their hearts to forgive her. This would be the greatest healing balm of all for them. Sincerely, Chad and Jennifer. I take such issue with that last paragraph. I cannot even begin to tell you. As a therapist and as a survivor of childhood abuse with a mother with mental disorders, this is horrible to say to children, that you have to find it in the hearts to forgive her because this is her only way to heal. Like, your mom is never going to be okay again if you don't forgive her for what she's done.
Her job to be doing the healing, and it has nothing to do with her children at all or anybody.
You do not need to forgive anyone to move on. Do not ever let anybody tell you that you need to forgive someone in order to heal and move on, because that's not true. If you feel like that's the right thing to do for you, then absolutely go for it. But this is not a prerequisite for healing. Forgiveness of somebody who abused you and neglected you and emotionally tortured and physically tortured you is not necessary for moving on and healing in life. Like, I'm sorry. This is absolutely bonkers to me. And this is like as Mormon as it gets. Like, these are words that would come out of my mother and my grandmother's own mouth. Like, bless my grandmother's soul. She was the nicest lady. But this is the consequences of Mormonism, is the enmeshment and the lack of physical, emotional boundaries and entitlement and expectations. Like, this is giving classic Mormon family, like, dynamics right here.
And it's always like a kind of like a greater good, because you have to understand the dynamic within a eternal family within Mormonism is that everybody is sealed to everybody. Mm-hmm. So there's a saying that salvation is a personal matter, but exaltation, which is what you attain when you're sealed to your family, is a family matter. We're all supposed to get there together. So when you add in the massive thorn in the side of a lot of the family, everybody starts to panic because they're like, this is our daughter who we're going to lose forever if she can't come back to the fold.
Yeah.
We're not going to be eternally sealed to her. She will be cast out from the celestial kingdom that we're all going to reside in. So people start to panic and kind of lose their grip on, is it right for these children to
Is it
have
healthy?
to? Is it healthy? Or is it comfortable? Or any of that? Obviously, nothing in this process is comfortable for any of the people involved. But
they're also counting on the fact that the judge is Mormon in this.
Yes, I can see where they're coming from in this situation because of the indoctrination that the Mormon Church has forced
put on
upon.
them.
This is one of the worst parts because this is the part of Mormonism that when you leave the church, people will not stop pestering you about it because you have ruined their picture of their eternal family that they were promised for living righteously. And now that image is marred and they are desperately trying to get that back to what they were promised when they were married or sealed in the temple or stuff like that.
Well, and this could point to issues like if we think about if there is like some like if there are mental health issues or concerns going on with Ruby, this like caricature almost applies to Ruby's upbringing as well, because just as much as they're forcing this on their grandchildren, they initially forced this stuff on Ruby. So these same methods of forgiveness and all this shit that we're like, wow, that's really toxic to push on a kid is also really toxic to push on Ruby.
Yeah.
And so she would have grown up with this rhetoric and hearing these things. And so this to her is not going to set off any alarm bells, but it could also ring true for, wow, this is not like emotionally attending to your children. Is accountability and giving them the space and time to heal in the way that they need to, instead of being like, forgive your mom, remember the mom she was.
Yep.
Like, well, yeah, I remember the mom that she was, the mom that traumatized me and abused me and tortured me. That's the mom I remember.
Yeah.
Like that's, I mean, it's
kind of hard to remember the good times when
and so this is very,
that has happened.
I wanted to include this because I think it is a very solid kind of depiction on what happens in Mormon families and likely what happened when Ruby was growing up, potentially in issues of like accountability and forgiveness just within their own family. Like you can imagine how toxic this would be for a child who was maybe like sexually abused by a family member or something. Like this kind of rhetoric is common within Mormonism, even in those situations. And so that's why I included this. And then the other one that I included, if you go to the next one, was from her brother.
Hold on. I just wanted to bring up a couple things. Somebody said there's a lack of boundaries on all sides. That is basically the norm.
Yeah.
Like
that's
in LDS families, you really don't see stuff like that. And it's been a big thing in these newer generations of people because that's not something that people are used to. And I guess that is kind of across the board, kind of a common thread, but
lots in religious families.
Yeah. And then also just a little lightheartedness. I cannot shake the image of a postcard arriving to their mission in Serbia.
Oh my God,
and
I know.
It says like season's greetings from Purgatory Correctional Facility in beautiful Washington County or something like that. I need to see the front of this postcard.
I'm sorry that I abused and tortured your grandchildren. Love, Ruby. Like,
please write a nice
that?
Statement
Oh
so I can get out in 4 years.
Jesus Christ.
Do postcards from jail say, wish I was there?
Anywhere but here. Oh my God.
With her mugshot attached. In crayon.
In crayon.
That'd be
funny.
funny.
Oh my God.
Anyway,
Okay,
are we just going to go to the next one?
Yeah. I wanted to
Thank you
include
for
this
indulging
one
me.
because not only is it Ruby's brother, but if you recall, Ruby's brother also went to Jodi.
Yes.
So I'm going to pull this up
detail real quick
on my end so I can read it a little bit better. Okay, so dear judge and future parole board, Ruby Franke is my older sister by a year and a half, and growing up we did a lot together and had a lot of shared experiences. Throughout her life, Ruby has always been an achiever and becomes recognized by authority figures. Her school teachers regularly commended her as she consistently earned high grades. She was praised by her piano teacher. She excelled in piano performance as well as competition. We worked at an on-call center together where she received numerous employee recognitions. Ruby always jumps in with both feet whether swimming, participating in the high school marching band, or the school jazz band pianist.
Please, for the love of God, tell me that Ruby didn't play flute.
During her career on YouTube, she often told me that her desire was to spread the message that mothers are important and that mothers have strength in nurturing their children. So depriving them of food. I never had any concerns for her and her children, and I was impressed with how generous and kind she has always been to my own children. Well, yeah, that's because they're not her children, Bo. Okay.
It's kind of how these types work.
Ruby and I both joined the Connections program, which adds some lore to this because we knew that Bo had been a client of Jodi's.
Yes, and then at some point
review.
he left a review about Connections and gave it a scathing
negative review. Ruby and I both joined the Connections program. As per usual, Ruby absorbed all that was taught. She recognized the instructor, Ms. Hildebrandt, as a woman who stood in authority and was recognized by the state of Utah as someone who was a properly trained and licensed professional. Like many authority figures in Ruby's life, Ms. Hildebrandt saw Ruby's potential. She saw that Ruby was easily trainable and had the ability to influence others. She saw the millions of followers Ruby had worked hard to acquire on YouTube and Instagram platforms. Many of the teachings from the Connections program were reasonable and good. Unfortunately, as I later discovered, that is what made the program so dangerous. It was entirely crazy. If it was entirely crazy, it wouldn't have had any influence. The program was by all definitions a cult. Wow! Who's been saying that since day one? Ms. Hildebrandt was the sole source of what was right or wrong and discouraged people from making their own life choices. A recurring theme was the principle of separation and isolation, which the leader routinely prescribed, which we know that. I personally...
Damn, is Bo looking into Stephen Hassan?
I personally witnessed numerous marriage relationships separated through Ms. Hildebrandt's encouragement, including, for a time, my own. I believe the primary reason my marriage, as well as many others, suffered is that couples felt a looming threat of divorce. In this way, Ms. Hildebrandt kept couples continually paying for her program. In Ruby's case, I believe Ms. Hildebrandt wanted Ruby's platform and influence for her own gain. At the continued encouragement of Ms. Hildebrandt, Ruby systematically pushed those around her away, first myself, and then our sister's parents, close friends, and then her husband, and finally her own children. Ruby has clearly been brainwashed. She has been taken advantage of by Ms. Hildebrandt. Now, in the absence of Ms. Hildebrandt, I see Ruby striving to restore those relationships. It came as no surprise to me that as soon as Ruby was removed from the fog of the cult, she recognized she was wrong, and she was ready and willing to unfeignedly take responsibility for the wrong she had done. I asked for this information to be considered in decisions related to Ruby's sentencing. It sincerely, Bo Griffiths.
I'm sorry, Bo. Respectfully. When you trap a rat, they tend to start doing things that are out of the ordinary. I feel like when she went to jail and saw that she was going to have to go to prison was probably playing a little bit of a part where she was reaching out to people and restoring those relationships. Not solely because she was away from Jodi.
Absolutely.
That is just my personal opinion.
Absolutely. And I mean, now we have even more 100% confirmation that Bo did go to Jodi for a time and that he actually separated him and his wife. And if you'll remember, Bo and his wife are the only one really without a platform. I think they have a very small Instagram, maybe.
I think his wife does some sort of content creation. Don't go and
but
search
not
that.
On the caliber of the other sisters at all.
No, it's like I think she might do TPT or something like that. If
so
you
she
know,
does
you
something
know. But
entirely
I don't
different.
want to get her involved in this.
Yeah, so they're very different, I think, just in terms of the family vlogging. But again, everybody seems to be ignoring the fact that these were issues before Jodi. There were problems before Jodi. And Ruby was not the picture-perfect parent before Jodi.
I find it really interesting that this is all about Jodi and nothing
really
implicates the fact that Ruby did, in fact, also participate in committing crimes. So
we will be talking about Adam's statement. So hang in there and we'll come back to it. Okay, so let's watch Jodi's because this is where shit gets real interesting.
It's getting real. Let's throw this up here. I'm going to watch this audio was not great in the last one.
Court recalls the
just for reference, much shorter at 11 minutes here.
Yep.
Let's throw captions on.
Matter of State of Utah versus Hildebrandt, case 231501763. Counsel are present.
There's our all-star lawyer.
Is present. Counsel, there is a pre-sentence investigation report. I have read it. Everyone has seen and reviewed that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Again.
Notably, I was going to add Chad, Sherry, and Kevin are also in the courtroom. They stayed for Jodi's hearing as well.
Epic.
The sentence was stipulated at the time of the plea agreement. What record do we need to make other than going forward with sentencing?
Your Honor, it would be repetitive. I had the same statement just with the last.
Look how annoyed she looks.
Where I was differentiating between Ms. Franke and Ms. Hildebrandt.
Okay, let's talk about
Look at her
housekeeping
face.
matters first. What about?
Look at how pissed she looks. Does she not look furious? No letters to confirm. No letters from Julie, Bonnie, Ellie, or anyone else. I even looked through the court docket to see if there were any others, and there were none other that I could see that were submitted for Ruby. So, and her siblings did not attend the hearing other than Bo, as far as I could tell. So I wouldn't be surprised if her siblings are frustrated with her. And that's completely valid.
Just wanted to bring up chronically with no chill. I understand that these words that we have for Ruby's family are harsh, but just because that they are related to the victims does not mean that they're not playing a part in prohibiting these children and the whole family
They
from
exploit their grandkids.
Yeah.
I mean, for money. What
Sorry.
else do you want to say?
I understand and I appreciate the criticism. I understand, but this is the reason why we're saying these things. I mean, you don't get to just get off scot-free because you suffered.
No.
And by proxy, obviously.
Restitution.
We've stipulated to keep that open for 8 months.
It is appropriate, Your Honor, since we don't have any evidence with respect to restitution, and that's because it is still in the process of being gathered by the county attorney's office. It's completely appropriate for the court to make no orders with respect to restitution other than to reserve all issues.
They are talking specifically about Jodi's finances and the selling of her house. So that is still ongoing because Kevin filed for restitution to pay for therapy and any physical injury like stuff for the kids. And there's talks of potentially doing that with Ruby as well, but that's still up in the air. But this is ongoing with Jodi, and her house is still allegedly for sale at this time.
Issues regarding restitution, and we have no issue with the eight-month time frame.
And the injunction that was previously issued by the court will remain in effect.
It will.
At least until that time.
It will remain in effect until further order of this court.
All right. Mr. Clark.
Thanks, Your Honor. The state of Utah respectfully requests that the court sentence Ms.
Oh, and I will add just real quick. Apparently, Adam Paul Steed is sitting behind Jodi. So I think he's on the right side of the courtroom. So remember, he did that Mormon Stories episode that got removed where he talked about how he and his wife went through a lot of trauma when they went to marriage counseling to Jodi. So he's here as well.
Miku's headphones. Yes, please respect your electronics. Apparently, it's about to get real.
Hildebrandt to consecutive prison terms for each of the 4 counts of aggravated child abuse to which she has pleaded guilty. The sentence was agreed to her in her plea agreement and is also recommended by adult probation and parole.
She does the blinking like my mom does.
Ms. Hildebrandt committed awful acts of child abuse. From May to August 2023, she and her business partner held 2 children, ages 9 and 11, turning 12, in a concentration camp-like setting in her house in Ivan City. The children were regularly denied food, water, beds to sleep in, and virtually all forms of entertainment. They were isolated from others and were hidden when people came to visit the house. They were forced to do physical tasks.
Can we power through this real quick? I don't want to rehash this awful shit.
He does say some different things.
Okay.
Like carrying loaded boxes up and down stairs and doing wall sits or sitting against a wall without assistance of a chair or stool for hours at a time. They were forced to do manual labor outdoors in the extreme summer heat, often without shoes or socks. They were also forced to stand outside on a cement patio in the summer heat for hours and even days. They were beaten, and the 12-year-old was regularly bound hand and foot after he attempted to run away in mid-July. Both children had extensive physical injuries from the abuse that required hospitalization to treat. The injuries from the binding are particularly bad. In addition to the physical abuse, the children were emotionally abused. They each believed to some degree that
Why didn't they bring up the cactus? That's wild.
I don't know if they...
That's pretty
do or
fucking
not. I don't
awful
remember.
aspect.
Yeah.
what was being done to them. Had the older of the two children not had the courage to run away and ask a neighbor to call the police, heaven only knows how much longer he could have survived. After being caught, Ms. Hildebrandt has shown little to no remorse for her actions. In telephone conversations that will be provided in full to the Board of Pardons and Parole, and which she knew to be recorded, she's repeatedly claimed that she is the victim and the children are the perpetrators.
Oh my God.
Bingo, baby.
I called it. I called it so hard. I hate that I did. I was saying from the beginning, I was like, Jodi will probably want to go to trial because she does not believe that she is guilty of any crime. The woman was practicing therapy, quote unquote. I'm going to use that very loosely. And she was literally saying that she was receiving revelation from God to help her clients. You cannot tell that person that what they are doing is wrong. They are so far removed from reality. They've created their own reality, and she doesn't feel like she's done anything wrong. And it's so funny that she was just on the phone like, yeah, this is all going to blow over. I'm not guilty of shit.
I'm wrongfully imprisoned.
This is the work of the adversary. The devil is working against me.
These are all us making up scenarios here, the things she probably could have said. We don't know if she said those things specifically.
This is conjecture, but I mean, she doesn't think that she's wrong, so I guarantee you she was probably throwing around, this is the work of the adversary, this is a government in distortion, this is democracy manifest.
This is like, and when we talk about like behaviors that are in line with mental health things, like this is one of the things that stands out to me, like the absolute grandiose sense of, I do no wrong, I am entitled to like be free and walk away from this with absolutely no consequences. I'm special. I don't deserve to be here. Like that is all very red flag behavior for possible mental health concerns. Again, we're not going to diagnose, but there are concerning things here that I see when I look at her and go, man, they're like, if I was in a position like of supporting her, those would be red flags for me of like, maybe we need to do something about this. Maybe you need to talk to someone because this is pretty extreme.
Yeah. And this
we don't know who she was talking to.
Textbook example of the backfire effect, what that happens when people are like so indoctrinated, or in the case of Jodi, she was just that far removed from reality due to whatever it may be, that once she has been persecuted from the adversary, she now believes that it's because what she was doing is right.
Yeah.
Regardless of what she was doing, she didn't believe that she was harming these children. She believed that she was saving them because they were evil. They were doing evil, just being children and being, they kind of seem like assholes, but they're children, whatever. So now
she also
sounded pretty clear that that's the mindset that she's in.
Yeah. Which that's what we said. We really thought there was a potential that she would go to trial because of this behavior.
I think she only took the plea deal because they knew that Ruby was going to do it, and Ruby was going to have to testify against her, and
I think she's bitter.
They were going to turn her against her or whatever. So her counsel convinced her to take a deal.
So I also think it's interesting that comparatively in this versus the last hearing that we watched, she seems very disengaged, almost like dissociated to me, it looks like. Like, to me, it looks like she is not really present, and is just like trying to survive in this space, which is different than the last hearing because she was looking around, she was glaring at the prosecutors, she was looking at her lawyer. She was like talking to the people behind her. Yeah. Like she was much, much more engaged in this, like in that hearing comparatively to this one. And so I wouldn't be surprised, they've been reportedly, both of them have been in like the medical unit at the prison or at the jail, according to the jail roster, a few times. It wouldn't surprise me, like jails have access to mental health professionals and people who prescribe, so it wouldn't surprise me if she was having severe mental health symptoms, if they were to give her like an anti-anxiety med
or some sort of sedative or
something,
whatever.
Like some kind of drug that's not like sedative so that she can still be present because they don't want to run into any issues of like, she wasn't
fit to stand
aware
trial
during her hearing. But it is interesting to me that her behavior is so different in this hearing versus the other one. And that also could be just from a behavior perspective of she's being accused of these things. Like the other hearings were very informal and didn't get into details much. This hearing is saying you did wrong, you're in trouble, you're serving your sentence, which for her is not going to sit well. So it could also be because of that she's majorly disengaging because of that also. So there are a few possibilities here.
Could quite possibly be having a "why have you forsaken me" situation.
And I don't know that Jodi would be one that would be willing to take medication.
A Joseph Smith in the in Liberty
Remember,
jail.
no diagnoses in chat. We're just talking about behavior.
Oh God, where art thou?
She's gone so far as to say that the things said in this proceeding and covered by the media today will be full of lies. The combination of three factors.
That's what she told the person on the phone.
Hold on.
The hearing would be full of lies.
That's wild. Let's back it up a couple.
The perpetrators. She's gone so far as to say that the things said in this proceeding and covered by the media today will be full of lies. The combination of three factors make Ms. Hildebrandt a significant threat to the community.
That is going to go over extremely poorly with the parole board or whatever board, because she agreed. Yeah, she agreed. She signed an agreement that all of the facts were true. Mm-hmm. Everything that she was being accused of, she does not dispute, and she accepts everything. And then she's on the phone telling other people, "This is all bullshit. I'm here against my will."
Knowing that those phone calls are going to be recorded, like, and this is where I'm seeing like the pattern of entitlement and like special, like the rules don't apply to me. Like the phone calls being recorded doesn't matter. Like the delusion involved to think that those phone calls aren't going to be used against you while you are standing trial. Potentially, and then not, and while you're going up for potential parole for your freaking sentence, like how disillusioned do you have to be to think that they will not use that against you?
You're gonna fall out of your chair.
Oh yeah, just wait.
God.
First, the severity of the abuse she caused to be inflicted on young children. Second, her attitude that everything she did was justified and that she is being wrongfully imprisoned.
There it is.
There it is.
Her training as a therapist and aptitude for using online resources to convince others to follow her guidance.
This is why she's a danger to the public.
76-3-401 lays out three factors the court should consider in determining whether to impose concurrent or consecutive sentences. The first is the gravity and circumstances of the offense. The second is the number of victims. And the third is the history, character, and rehabilitative need of the defendant. As agreed to in the plea agreement and as recommended by adult probation and parole, consecutive sentences are appropriate here. This is due to the severity of the abuse to the two victims and the extreme need for Ms. Hildebrandt to be rehabilitated so that she no longer will present a risk to the community. The state respectfully requests that she be sentenced.
So, yes, important clarification Laurel added. Remember at the beginning of this when they were talking about what was actually in the plea agreement, her lawyer made a statement saying that they don't agree with some things, but she had agreed to what had been laid out in the plea agreement. So her lawyer will go on to say and has said repeatedly that they don't agree with the characterizations and they don't agree with some of the other things that have been said about her, but she does not necessarily disagree with the facts that have been laid out in the plea agreement.
4 consecutive terms.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Terry?
Thank you, Your Honor. I will be brief. As is always the case in cases that come before courts, there are two sides to every case. And and even in a case like this, that remains the case. There are many, many allegations regarding these two individuals, Ms. Franke and my client, Ms. Hildebrandt. The only facts in this case that are adjudicated facts are those set forth in the plea agreement that she entered into freely and knowingly and voluntarily. Those facts, those adjudicated facts, are significant. They certainly provide a basis for the pleas and provide a basis for
Not
the
the bishop's
stipulated
voice.
sentence in this case. My experience with Ms. Hildebrandt is that she is not the person that she has been portrayed to be.
Notice how, I'm just going to pause here, she has not looked at him once. And this is what I mean by dissociated.
It's a 1,000-yard stare.
Like, it does
Deer
not
in
even
the
appear
headlights.
that she is in there at all. Like, not even acknowledging him when he stands up, didn't acknowledge him when he talks. Like, I don't know if she's looking at the judge or just looking straight ahead, but also this whole, like, two sides thing. Like, tell me the two sides of child abuse, Terry. What are the two sides there? So, again, he's saying that they don't agree with all the allegations that have been put forth.
And I want to go on record. Obviously, the words coming out of his mouth in this situation, they sound like clown shit.
Yeah.
Obviously. But he is doing his job to make sure that Jodi has a fair trial and fair representation.
Indeed.
Because this is the guy, if you are accused of a heinous crime in the state of Utah and they are seeking the death penalty, this is the sole guy who is standing between you and the literal firing line. So,
yeah. Like, so he is a very,
yes,
like very well respected attorney.
He is definitely the cream of the crop.
But having said that, she has accepted responsibility in this case. She has entered into this plea agreement with a stipulated sentence of 4 consecutive sentences. She did that at the time she entered into the plea agreement, knowing that that would be the court's order. She is before the court today, knowing that that will be the court's order, and she fully accepts that. She accepts responsibility, and she accepts the consequences for her conduct. And we will submit it to the court on the stipulated agreement.
Mr. Terry, you suggested that there are two sides to every case. I generally agree with you.
So remember, we just watched Ruby's case. The judge did not make any additional comments. He did not take that path here.
Ms. Hildebrandt didn't make a statement to AP&P in the course of the pre-sentence investigation report.
Correct.
Why did she not?
So I'm going to pause here real quick. The pre-sentence investigation, remember, this is what happens when they're looking at sentencing, is they pull up everybody's criminal record, they talk to family members, they gather statements, they just get like a really well-rounded perspective on the individual as part of the pre-sentencing investigation so that they can take that into account when they're deciding to sentence somebody, right? So like if somebody has a bunch of previous convictions, that's obviously going to influence what the sentencing looks like for this conviction, for example. So as part of the pre-sentencing investigation, the person that is being investigated can make a statement as part of that, which Ruby did. But this judge is pointedly pointing out that she did not make a statement with the pre-sentence investigation. And when I was watching some other lawyers talk about this case earlier, it said that this is absolutely like almost unheard of to not have a defendant make a statement as part of the PSI. And so the judge sees this and goes, this seems weird to me, and points this out, and her attorney has an interesting response.
To reserve her right to make a statement before the court today, and she has a brief statement that she wants to read, Your Honor.
Okay.
And
all right.
Didn't answer the question.
My guess.
We'll come back around to it, but
my guess is that she didn't want to, and he couldn't make her, and he was like, "Well, sorry."
Yep.
I guess that is what it is.
Okay, so he's gonna get her up.
Go ahead.
I sincerely love these children.
And you lost me.
Literally falling out of my chair. Are you,
girl? Who? How?
Oh
what?
My
Why?
God!
I was aghast.
Somebody needs to cut the snake out of her mouth that's living where her tongue should be. That is crazy.
My God.
That is so crazy.
You can kind of see it looks like she's crying here. It kind of looks
that
like
is
there's
the same face she's been wearing.
There's like a little tear
time.
there. But no like other expressions happening.
She's in the sunken place, I swear. But she put herself there. I don't know.
I desire for them to heal physically and emotionally. One of the reasons I did not go to trial is that I did not want them to emotionally relive the experience which would have been detrimental to them.
Wow. Oh my God.
Do you want me
Somebody,
to feel bad?
There's no hand patting her on the back. Somebody rush over and pat her on the back.
This is what I'm saying. It's the entitlement. It's the I'm special. It's the look at me. Look what I did.
My hope and prayer is that they will heal and move forward to have beautiful lives. I am willing to submit to what the state feels would be an appropriate amount of time served to make retribution as an outcome.
And in answer to your question, Your Honor.
That's it. That's her whole
Holy
statement.
moly, dude.
She does not add anything else to that. It was those like 3 or 4 sentences. That was it. And no further comments. And this would not be a replacement for the pre-sentence investigation statement that she also could have offered. And so my understanding is the PSI statement is important, and it is very common, and all the other lawyers are like, you're telling me she didn't comment. That's kind of sus.
She kind of signed her death warrant on that one.
So not a very elaborative statement by any means. I'm not saying she's got to be Ruby and like doing her whole like Oscar moment, but this was a hit,
should
like a swing and a miss for me.
Probably have gone with your original strategy and just kept it quiet, because man, but seriously, I hope and pray.
But she still seems completely disengaged. Like she looks like she might be crying, but her facial expression hasn't changed. Her intonation has barely shifted at all. Like, and Ruby's like talking like a normal person during her apology. Like, this is very like rehearsed. I have to say this. I have to make a statement so I appear remorseful. Like, I have to say that I love the kids so it makes it sound less bad, even though, like, is there anything that she could say that would thrill me? No, but this was not it. This was terrible.
Do not hope. Do not pray. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go straight to jail. Sorry for
prison.
Everybody for being
She's
loud.
going. Okay,
prison
so
this
the
time,
lawyer, her lawyer is going to elaborate on the judge's initial question again.
I knew that whatever she might say to the author of the pre-sentence report would probably sound hollow and self-serving, and perhaps it does today.
You don't say! But still, like, based on the other streams of the lawyers and things that I was watching today, it just, like, that is a big presumption to make as a lawyer, to say don't make any statement in the PSI because it might be perceived as hollow. Because what if it's not? What it's perceived as, like, if you don't have anything, in my opinion, there's much more assumptions being made than, like, I am remorseful, I regret what I did, I take ownership and accountability. But he is doing his job, right? Like, he's saying she has the option to not give a statement. That's her right. And it probably, anything she says is going to shoot herself in the ass. And he's not wrong.
At least if it doesn't ring true, at least it was said.
At least it was said.
There's like not even a conjecture, not even a shadow of a doubt that she doesn't feel bad, because when she signed that agreement, she made no statement. She's just like, yep, whatever. Do your worst. I know I'm not wrong. Anyway.
But I know that my client, in the statement that she makes to the court today, that statement is absolutely sincere.
Dude, he probably had to twist her arm to write that.
I know. That's what I'm saying, is like, Ruby's lawyer probably didn't have to say anything to her. She probably just went with it. And he is probably like pulling her arm to get her to do it.
Does Ms. Hildebrandt recognize that it's her behavior that caused the harm to the children that she's referred to in her statement?
Your Honor, she recognizes that she was, along with Miss Franke,
he probably wrote it. Probably.
that she made decisions with respect to the discipline of those children that were wrong, that caused harm to those children. She fully recognizes that and accepts responsibility for that.
Yes, some very important things being pointed out in chat here. Ruby is much more experienced in managing the public's perception of her, and because of the YouTube channel. That is a very fair point you guys are making.
In all the shit that we saw with Connections, the only real display of emotion that we ever got from Jodi, and there might have been some more stuff,
Was the
but
reviews
the
incident?
meltdown that she had over the lack of good reviews that people were leaving for Connections. So it's like,
which is another pattern.
I feel like that is almost the only earnest, the only time that she's showing like an earnest attempt at convincing people is when she's like out of sorts, like completely off her rocker.
Well, and yeah, and it's another concerning pattern, like as a, you know, somebody with the mental health background, to see like somebody fly off the handle, like absolutely fly off the fucking handle over something as stupid and insignificant and minor as reviews on a website. Like we all watched that and we're like, this is scary. Like she is scary in responding to this right now. Like this is frightening. And that is a concerning thing to see as a professional, is like flying off the handle and getting extreme irritability, extreme irritation, extreme anger over very minor things, or is just very unpredictable in responses. Like that is concerning behavior. And I mean, just her level of rage at that point was just absolutely unwarranted.
All right. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Ms. Hildebrandt, this circumstance is tragic. It's largely, of course, of your making by any measure.
I'm telling you, the judge was much more intense with her than he was with Ruby.
Your conduct in this case was disastrous for these children. Kevin. Adults are supposed to protect children. Adults with specialized training in particular are supposed to protect children. You didn't do that in this case. In this case, you terrorized children, and the result.
Truer words have never been spoken.
Right on.
Yeah, I think the AP&P is gonna have a hard time not giving her 30.
Have been tragic. It's what happened to these children, and your philosophy in dealing with them, frankly, seems detached from reality or any objective standard of decency or even common sense. And the court finds that it is appropriate that you serve a prison sentence. The court finds under the statute, Utah Code 76-3-401, that given the gravity and circumstances of the offenses, the number of victims, and the history and character and needs of the defendant, that consecutive sentences are appropriate. The court imposes 4 1 to 15-year sentences to be, again, served consecutively for each of the 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. The last thing I do need to tell you is that you only have 30 days to file or perfect an appeal of any error of the court by filing a written notice of appeal with the clerk of the court. If you don't do that, you will lose your right to appeal. That has to be filed in writing, and again within 30 days. You also have the right to the assistance of an attorney and to have an attorney appointed if you cannot afford to hire your own. Thank you. We're in recess.
Okay, watch her walk away.
Thanks, Your Honor.
Watch her walk. Like she just seems out of it. Like, just seems completely out of it to me. I would not be surprised if she was medicated, because this is very bizarre behavior for her to be so dissociated. And I can't rule out the possibility of like, maybe she is in crisis and that's the reason for her behavior. But what you guys didn't see was because of how they cut things and where Kevin and them were sitting. There was a few times where Kevin was like profusely nodding at the things that the judge was saying.
He was like, yes!
And according to one of the other reporters, when Jodi said that she cared, or that she loved the kids, apparently both Cherry and Shad kind of laughed and like smirked a little bit. And I don't blame them, because you're like, what the hell are you saying? I would have been
disruptive in the courtroom.
Like, I would want to throw something at her. Like, seriously. What are you doing? And so it is interesting, the dynamics that were happening in the courtroom that we really couldn't see, because we couldn't see any of their expressions really. I was told that, like, reading other things, and that Kevin was crying during Ruby's statement when he was talking about their marriage and things, which wouldn't surprise me. So like,
are her feet shackled? Do we know that for sure? I don't.
Because Ruby didn't walk like that.
Ruby wasn't shackled. She was accused of the same crimes. I don't know. Anyway, sashay away.
Doesn't
go back to your
explain the whole
cell.
dissociated the whole time.
Wash
even
your
if that's the case.
greasy ass hair. Nasty.
Yeah, the presentation of the two of them in court is interesting because women do find means to present themselves like, you know, they use things for makeup.
I know. We're all like, how did Ruby get her hair curled like that? Because
they have ways.
They don't have that. And then Jodi's out here with greasy ass hair still. Didn't even bother.
Yeah.
Girl, you're going to prison. I think you want to put your best foot forward in this situation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I know we have unfair standards for women. But even a demon can get ready too, am I right?
So neither of them have appealed. Ruby waived her appeal rights, for my understanding, and I think I would be shocked if Jodi appealed at this point. But I guess for Jodi, if she hasn't waived her right, it's still on the table. But she has a solid lawyer, and I don't see him pushing her that direction if the judge hasn't done anything and the court hasn't done anything that's like heinous or like really bad. I just don't see it being worth it for her, from my like uneducated law opinion, but that's a good question for all the other lawyers out there.
Okay, so just to rehash, or if you missed it earlier, we kind of gave a rundown as to what their sentences are because Utah does it a little bit differently. As it stands right now, they will be serving the same sentence, but that is to be determined at a later date, which I think is once they've served the minimum sentence, which is 4 years for both of them. The adult parole and probation board.
Okay.
The adult parole and probation board will review their sentences and determine if extra time is to be served within that range. So each of them will be serving for minimum up to 30 years because each of those charges carried and served consecutively carry 1 to 15 years each, one being the minimum. And Utah has a cap at 30 years consecutive serving.
So if Jodi gets max sentence, she'll be there for 30 years.
She'll be there for 30 years. And she will be in her 80s when she gets out of prison. So I don't think that she will last that long.
So go to the next slide, because after the sentencing, they do press conferences sometimes with the various attorneys that are involved and sometimes the prosecutor. So the prosecutor in this case did give a brief press conference, and he said some things that I was not aware of and didn't know because normally I don't usually watch these things. But I wanted to include it because he did say some things that I think are important, and he does give Ruby some feedback that I don't think is appropriate.
You mentioned that the now 12-year-old had particularly bad injuries caused by the
Thank you.
binding. Can you explain that further?
We anticipate releasing photos when the public information is released on this.
The 30-day period.
At the end of the 30-day period. He was bound hand and foot with handcuffs around him, and at times he was laid on his stomach, and the handcuffs from his ankles to his wrists were tied, so he was hog-tied in a position that kept his legs off the ground and his arms off the ground for hours at a time. And there is clear evidence of the handcuffs cutting into him and doing harm.
Are you able to describe these phone calls in which you say Hildebrandt lacked remorse?
Yes, and we anticipate releasing those also. And generally, jailhouse calls are private matters, but if you're discussing your criminal acts, then that's not the case.
We want to begin with the dire situation at the southern border.
Excuse me.
Freaking ad. Mute it.
More than 300,000 migrants.
A record.
Freaking law and crime. So 30-day period, they'll release more information, and apparently they're going to release the calls, because I thought they were private matters, but he's saying because she was discussing the crime that she committed, they can be released to the public. So she shot herself in the foot, basically.
Oh! Nice. I'll play it here. That way we don't get ad interruption again.
And they're standing in front of the courthouse right by the street, so you have like all of the freaking car noises and shit passing by. It's the audio's a nightmare.
Driver medal.
And Miss Hildebrandt just has not expressed any remorse and continues to justify her perspective of things, and to the degree that in her mind it's clear that the perpetrator here is the devil and the children. And
what did I say? Just like a half hour ago.
And she is a victim to the devil's brand or causes. At the end of the day, this is a case about religious extremism, and I think that Miss Frankie's statement kind of got into that.
Absolutely.
These guys went down a rabbit hole, and Miss Hildebrandt believed that she was regularly talking to God, and Miss Frankie was following the direction that she was getting from Miss Hildebrandt. Again, and she alluded to that in her statement. And they felt entirely justified in that they were helping children to repent and casting out devils from children, which is ludicrous.
Which is not very Mormon at all, really. Like the idea of like possession and like, you know, I have a family member who actually did perform an exorcism when he was a bishop, but so it's not like entirely uncommon.
Probably not anything spiritual. Probably just like
crazy.
On drugs.
But it's pretty rare. Like Mormons don't generally believe in the idea of possession. Like they're not like other religions where they rare. Like regularly cast out the devil and think that like people are possessed by demons, and like that's not Mormon at all. And so again, we return to the idea of if this is religious extremism, like they did go down a path of straying far away from Mormonism, because I have never heard a Mormon express fear about somebody being possessed by the devil other than my mother, and that's like a whole other religious extremism issue.
And wrong, because child abuse is never okay. But that was the mindset that they had at the time, and I think that you saw today there's good reason to believe that Miss Frankie has kind of understood that, and there's not reason to believe that Miss Hildebrandt.
Ruby Franke also talked about warning signs. Are there going to be potentially more cases down the line here?
Not that we're aware of at this time.
She mentioned, or you mentioned, just this really powerful statement. You said this was a concentration-like setting for these children.
And you know, you look at the images of people that have been stuck in concentration camps and malnourished for a time, and you look at the forced labor and the types of injuries that they have from that, and that's what these kiddos experienced. They were held, they were denied food to the point that is painfully obvious in looking at them. They were left out in the heat without water as a form of punishment, and they were forced to do work in the St. George heat in June and July and August without not like without gloves, but without shoes, being out in the desert.
Not without gloves, but without shoes? That blows my mind. Wow.
Being forced to do labor. Like, if that's not a concentration camp setting, I don't know what is.
We saw Sherry was here, her two older children, right? And her estranged husband, Kevin. Have you been in communication with them? What have they told you?
Her estranged husband, Kevin.
Estranged.
That's
Soon
just
to be
the
ex-husband.
caption messing up, but he is kind of strange, I will admit.
I have been in communication with them, and I'm not going to get into conversations with them. But I feel for what the family is going through, particularly the youngest, you know, the primary victims. But child abuse is an awful crime, and families have to pick up the pieces.
Those two older kids were really taken aback when Jodi Hildebrandt said, "I dearly love these kids." Their reactions.
They were in disbelief on
Yeah.
this.
What do you make of that?
I obviously couldn't see them from where I was sitting. I can't. You can't climb into people's heads when they've convinced themselves of something, and I don't know that Jodi doesn't I suspect that Jodi believes everything that she says.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I completely
Without
agree.
a doubt.
I truly think that she would not go so hard for these things if she did not truly believe them. She would not, like, damn near incriminate herself on jail fucking phone calls if she did not truly believe that she was innocent. Like, there is no way she would potentially put herself in such a, like, shady position knowing that these jail calls are being recorded if she did not firmly believe everything that she's saying. She's not a stupid person.
Yeah.
Like, she's not. She's highly manipulative and she knows what she's doing. And so there's just no way that she doesn't truly actually believe these things.
Loving kids in a way that is child abuse is a crime that merits prison, right? Like, that's not love, that's abuse. And I suspect that Jodi honestly believed that she was helping these children, that she was casting out devils. But that's not okay. If anybody ever finds themselves in a situation where what you're doing to kids is something that you have to actually hide from your neighbors, that's a pretty good sign that you should stop, right?
I mean, he's not wrong.
Yep.
And clearly that was going on. They were actively hiding things, and because the abuse was horrific, and it would have been apparent to anybody that would have seen the kids that something was wrong here.
Is this some of the worst child abuse you've seen in your career?
Yes, and not just in my career, but in our office's career, in our institutional memory, this is one of the worst child abuse cases we've seen.
You consider this precedent setting?
Was this not the same guy that prosecuted Warren? Wasn't it?
On the same team. The guy is different. The
Oh,
guy,
it is not the lead prosecutor.
not the lead prosecutor, no.
Gotcha. But I mean,
he was
wouldn't
on
that
this
be in the
case.
same?
Yes, they were in the same office.
I
so yes.
guess they weren't prosecuting the worst of the worst, which was all in Texas,
No, I mean
wasn't it?
there's more
But
grotesque
still,
things out there, I'm sure, but this is not a comparison game. Like, all of, like, this is horrible no matter what.
Yeah, I think the worst part of it was all in Texas, which they wouldn't have on their
In
desks.
terms of the actual sentences they end up serving?
No, because I think the board takes everything into account so specifically.
You think Jodi's going to end up serving more?
I hope so. I hope that Jodi does serve more. I think that would only be fair. I think that Ruby should serve. So the sentence that they got is basically 4 to 30 years today, right? The 4 1-year minimum stat, and then in Utah you're capped at 30 years. I think that a 4-year minimum for Ruby's actions are entirely appropriate. I hope that Jodi serves more time than that, and I hope that she isn't out of prison until everybody is completely confident that she's no longer a risk. And to get there, she's going to have to acknowledge that she has done wrong, and that you can't use religion as a means to justify your crazy behavior.
Do you think
He's so
did not
candid.
hold back.
He's so candid.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand, why would the mother, in your opinion, deserve less time when she's torturing her kids versus a stranger? Wouldn't you?
This reporter asks a very solid question. Why do we hold the mother of these children, less accountable for abuse than the stranger who's also inflicting abuse?
Yeah.
Because in terms of responsibility, you have I'm a parent, I have a responsibility to my child. And if if something is to happen to him, I'm the one that's held accountable. And I can't just say somebody forced me to, because I'm still responsible for that child. It doesn't matter whether I'm the one inflicting the abuse or not.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that he meant that 4 is all she deserves, that he just thinks that 4 is appropriate. But this is what I'm saying, is the media perception of Ruby compared to Jodi is much, much different. Ruby is almost kind of getting way less negative or critical attention than Jodi is. Because of her statement.
I think that it plays a big part in it.
And that's a lot of news reporters and people all over the internet were commenting about how thorough her statement was, and how she thanked people and thanked the judge, thanked the prosecutor, thanked the police. People were saying, I've never seen that before. And I'm like, you know, and Natalie Lawyer Chick, who's a friend of our channel, and we've been on hers and she's been on ours before, talked about how, like, largely it's irrelevant. Like, it's performative. It's performative. Her statement is performative. Do I believe that she's remorseful? I think maybe a little bit. I think maybe Ruby is less concerning to me than Jodi.
But yeah. Is she more remorseful because she's now going to prison? Or is
Maybe.
she remorseful, like, truly?
Maybe. But
Godly
either way,
sorrow.
they both deserve extreme consequences for this, because 4 minimum is, like, warranted, but I don't think he was saying, like, she just deserves the 4. I think he's saying that, like, that, I mean, at its minimum is appropriate.
Yeah.
But he's hoping, obviously, for Jodi to get more, which I agree with.
Irradiated Woman says, in my opinion, just because Jodi has done this shit to multiple families for literal decades, and she's supposed to be the credentialed professional. Does any of that apply to the case? So when they're taking into consideration other
my understanding
things.
is that will be part of that's part of the pre-sentencing investigation as they go through their history. So the fact that her license was taken away, or it wasn't necessarily taken away, she was put on probation because of that violation, that, to my understanding, will be included in the pre-sentence report. And so the parole board, when determining the sentence, is going to look at that and go, oh, hey, there were these instances. She also has a record of, like, a bunch of speeding tickets. Like, the woman speeds like nobody's business. And so she has a bunch of speeding tickets, which is also going to be in that PSI. And so they're going to be taking those things into account when determining her sentence. So it's not just, like, the actions necessarily of this case. My understanding is the PSI gives them more, like, a more well-rounded perspective of the individual.
But they wouldn't be able to take into consideration alleged crimes like what happened to Jesse.
Jesse can make a statement and provide it to PSI.
Okay.
So they could provide it to the parole board and they could take it into account. It doesn't necessarily mean that it makes a giant difference in sentencing, but when you're trying to make a decision on whether to let somebody out of prison, if they have a history of doing these things, even if they were never convicted because the statute of limitations ran out, then that's information that the parole board would want to know. You know, like, that's valuable information. Versus if you look at the PSI for somebody like Ruby, she has some speeding tickets and there's some DCFS reports that were all unfounded. And so those aren't really going to stand out to anybody. Like, there's not going to be a whole lot of background to Ruby where people are going to be like, oh, she's a repeat offender. You know, she's been involved with the law multiple times, like, things of that nature.
And again, so they both got the same deal, right? Like, we didn't give her a less of a minimum time. Part of the mission of what we do when we incarcerate people, I'll obviously want to see justice done. And a mother abusing her children in this way is awful. And people should go to prison for that. Something that is really important is that people shouldn't be released from prison unless they've hit the maximum amount of time they should be in, or they've done enough that justice is served, and it's clear that they're no longer a risk to the community. And I'm super concerned.
I don't feel like that is, you can be certain of that after they just served jail time, though.
No, you can't.
That just because they haven't done anything bad while they're in the clink does not mean that they're rehabilitated by any means.
No, and prison is not great for rehabilitation anyway.
Yeah, the objective data on that one is not really helping the case to that end.
But he points out some interesting things about her in this next part.
That Jodi, if she were released today, is a significant risk to gather followers. Ruby was essentially a follower of Jodi. And if she's gathering people and then convincing them to do this kind of thing, that's a huge risk. And those type of people shouldn't be walking the streets when they've committed these kind of crimes.
There was some back and forth with the restitution piece of this. Can you explain where you are with that?
So there were a couple of motions filed over the course of the last month about that, and we anticipate a restitution claim coming in that will cover ongoing therapy and physical care, physical recovery if needed, of the victims of these crimes. The state hasn't submitted a claim for restitution yet, and we want to make sure that there's that there's plenty of time for all of that to be kind of analyzed and brought in before we would close out restitution. And
so somebody asked if the abuse started when Ruby met Jodi or was it further back. So if you're new here, this has been ongoing for a while, and that's why we've covered Ruby as extensively as we have. Ruby has been abusing her children independently of Jodi for years.
Not handcuffing them and hog tying them,
but taking away their beds, sending them to sketchy wilderness camps, depriving them of food, and other things. Like, those are just the things that she was willing to put on camera. And willing to talk about on camera. So the full extent of it, we'll never know. And I think that's why this didn't go to trial, because I think both her and Jodi were both parts terrified of what actually would come out in discovery. But yes, this has been a long-term thing. If you go to our channel, we have a playlist titled 8 Passengers and Connections, and it walks you through everything. We even discussed how Connections was a cult.
And we could even do a revision.
We could even do a revision of that now, because
we can see a lot more.
It would be 1000% solid now, but we had determined that it had a list of cult characteristics that we went through.
Rebecca brings up a good point. The camp, we are pretty sure
camp happened after Jodi. Was that after Jodi?
That was at the.
Was he seeing her at that time?
I'm pretty sure that was at the suggestion of Jodi.
That's another thing that's neglected here is the therapist. Something that we have to avoid. Is what is called, it's part of our ethical code that's called dual relationships, which means that we have one, basically you're only allowed to have one relationship with a client. So I can't be a therapist to my client and a friend with my client, because that's a dual relationship and that's unethical, and there's sketchy things that can happen when that branches out, right? And so with Jodi, she was Chad's therapist, was Ruby's son's therapist, and that should be the primary relationship that existed. They then branched out and became business partners and then moved in together, which I can't even go on about how...
Contrary what her counsel would lead you to believe, they were, in fact, collaborating.
Indeed. And so that is a dual relationship. You cannot be besties with your child's therapist. It doesn't matter if it's your therapist. Jodi is the one who started Connections, yes. She started that after she got in trouble and got her license put on probation for an ethics violation.
She rebranded her practice into Connections.
And transformed to the coaching.
Literally, it is the same business. She just pivoted away from what she was doing so she wouldn't have to be doing it under her therapy license, which she was bound by codes and ethics and things. And
she has surrendered her license up to once this investigation started happening and they were arrested, she surrendered her license to Doppel, and so she can no longer practice therapy even if she were to get out today. And that's the beef that I have a lot of times with life coaches and things, is I'm sure there are great life coaches out there. I'm sure of that. I'm sure there are ethical life coaches out there. However, generally speaking, there is no ethical board or things that hold life coaches accountable. They don't have anything that holds them accountable for bad behavior. Nothing about confidentiality, nothing about inappropriate behavior. There is nothing that's preventing them from engaging in this. If I were to do what Jodi did now, I'm going to lose my license. I'm going to get disciplined by the board. If a life coach were to do what Jodi did, nothing's going to happen. She'll be responsible to the court if she committed a crime, potentially, but there's no board that says you can't be a life coach anymore, versus if I did that as a therapist, they're like, bitch, you're done. You're not a therapist anymore. And so that's kind of the beef that I have with life coaches. So I'm sure there's good ones out there, but just be thorough when you're thinking about getting a life coach. That's all I will say.
Khalid says she's definitely not getting her license back or practicing anymore. I think at this point she should be worried about getting out of prison before she dies.
Quite literally, yeah.
Anyway, we got this.
Okay, so this is attorney. I skipped, for time reasons, I skipped the one from Ruby's attorney because he didn't really say anything. There was really nothing there that came out that was things that we didn't know. He was very black and white, but there were some things that Terry said.
Unfortunately, it looks like we don't have captions for this just because it was a long live stream. Probably hasn't processed yet. So just put our good listening ears on. Sorry about that.
That doesn't surprise me, but again, she was sincere in that statement. Do you think
she should have had more to say? Ruby spoke for a very detailed length of time, and Jodi had a few sentences. Did you go over that with her? Was there an opportunity for her to say more?
She had the opportunity.
Do you have it on the screen?
She wanted to say. I did not put words in her mouth.
Sorry, you guys can't hear that because I'm a dummy. Let me back it up a little bit here.
I was like, why am I still looking at myself?
Thank you, chat, for hitting me there.
Her statement that she hopes for both the physical and emotional healing of these children is absolutely sincere.
She did him no favors.
She really didn't.
How much time she serves will ultimately be up to the Board of Pardons, as with Miss Franke.
When she said that she loved the children, Chad and Sherry had smirks and were looked shocked on their faces. Do you have a comment about that?
That doesn't surprise me, but again, she was sincere in that statement.
Do you think she should have had more to say? Ruby spoke for a very detailed length of time, and Jodi had a few sentences. Did you go over that with her? Was there an opportunity for her to say more?
She had the opportunity to say whatever she wanted to say. I did not put words in her mouth. I wanted her to make a statement from the heart. That's what she felt like she needed to convey today.
Okay, so he didn't write anything for her.
He said
and
he didn't.
He definitely had to twist her arm.
But he probably
like,
highly encouraged her to say something.
You need to say something, or else you're done. You're gone. You're never coming out.
That it's about the children, not about her, and that's what she did.
The prosecution said there's phone calls that are recorded in which Hildebrandt lacks remorse. What do you know about those phone calls, and is she?
I know that early on in the case, she had phone calls with individuals that were in support of her, did not believe that she did the things that she was accused of doing.
Pam.
It's got to be Pam, right?
I can't imagine there
speculation.
Being anybody.
We're
in
not
her
accusing
corner.
Pam, but
yeah, it's just funny because of The Office. Anyway,
this is what I found interesting: is he's saying that this is how she was talking to people in the beginning, but he goes on to say more.
I have not listened to those phone calls, as the county attorney's office has. But again, whatever was said was early in the case, and that is not her position today.
So she's changed how she feels about it.
As often is the case when individuals are charged, arrested, accused, sometimes it's a process to come to the point where they take responsibility and accept the consequences.
A lot of people.
I know he's got to be saying this, but there is absolutely nothing about her performance in the courtroom that would indicate that anything is different
whatsoever. Well, that's why the judge questioned her about it, and it was interesting to me that he hadn't listened to them. I don't know if that's because, like he said, the prosecuting, like the attorney's office had them. So I don't know if he just didn't have the opportunity. I mean, it is kind of in my non-legal brain with no legal background and experience whatsoever, right? Like I'm a therapist, not a lawyer. It just seems weird to me that he wouldn't have listened to those calls. But that's just me, in my uneducated opinion.
We don't need to be worrying about where the kids are now, by the way.
We don't know, and it's private.
They are children, and if anybody were asking where your kids are, it would be weird. So we don't need to be worrying about that. Anyway.
Spoken out about other victims in this case, the victims of Jodi and other different sorts. And I know this is about the children, but how much does that weigh into what you guys have discussed with Jodi?
As far as other victims, that has not been a factor.
Well, and prosecutors are saying that they're hoping that Jodi gets a lengthier, heavier sentence. They feel that she's kind of the ringleader in this whole situation.
That's the prosecution's position. It has been from the beginning. As I said when we entered into the plea agreement, she did not do that because Ms. Franke had agreed to testify against her. That decision was made before Ms. Franke ever agreed to testify against her to cooperate with the state.
Mr. Terry, you said that there were two sides to every case. What is the side of Jodi Hildebrandt that we're not seeing?
I'm not going to go into the specifics of allegations that she agrees with and doesn't agree with. I will stand by the statement that I made in the sentencing hearing, and that is that the factual basis that is set forth in the plea agreement, those are the only adjudicated facts in the case. She admitted to those facts. She takes responsibility for those facts. She's been sentenced on those facts.
This is a small, family-oriented community, and her home was essentially likened to a concentration camp. How did she square that? How did she walk around living in this community while there was a house of horrors?
I'm not prepared to respond to that. That's an allegation that I heard for the first time today. I mean, that's a characterization by the prosecutors, which again is no surprise. But that's from their perspective, and I'm not prepared to address that.
You don't feel that's an accurate description?
I do not.
You disagree with that?
I do.
Has Ms. Hildebrandt, has she expressed remorse to you about what happened?
Many times. Many times.
What is her remorse? What is she sorry about?
That she didn't make different decisions and that would have resulted in the children being more protected.
Is she delusional?
I'm not going to respond to that.
Has she had people
That
come
question
visit her
sent
family?
me.
And
No other context, no further elaboration. Is she delusional? Like, girl, what are you saying right now? Like, what kind of question is that? And of course he's gonna say no. Like, what kind of question is that? But I think this dude is doing a good job. Like, from a non-lawyer perspective, he seems to be holding his own and sticking to the facts and, like, representing his client without being, like, besties with his client, you know? So I think, aside from the phone calls thing, he appears very solid to me in his representation of Jodi.
Yeah. Hannah did bring up, it looks like somebody took issue with something I said earlier, and I remember saying it regarding kids being little assholes. I don't know these kids. I don't know if they were being assholes or whatever. What Jodi and Ruby perceived as what could be being little jerks or whatever is what they were calling evil. They weren't doing anything evil. Sometimes kids can, you know,
misbehave.
They push the boundaries. I have a 3-year-old. I'm a stay-at-home dad, and he pushes it a lot. Do I think he's evil? Absolutely not. He's a sweet angel, and he is the light of my life. But sometimes when I'm trying to get into bed, he is always trying to push back on me. And anyway,
Kids
so
push
they're
boundaries,
not,
that's-
I'm not saying they're assholes. I don't know these kids or whatever. That's what they were taking. Maybe they probably weren't even doing that. And then they were saying that these kids were evil. So I was not intending on disparaging these kids that I don't know or anything of the sort.
It seems there's only one person who took your comment that way. So
Yeah. Well, they had mentioned a couple times that they were not a fan of it. So I don't want anybody thinking that that's who I am, because I'm not.
Yeah, kids push boundaries. That's what they do.
That is just what
Ruby has a larger family that has been a little bit more present at some of the hearings. So has she had some support in all of this?
I don't know that she's had visits, personal visits, but I know that she's been in contact with people who are supportive of her.
No family, though?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Is she going to sell her home? I know the restitution can play out for...
It's for sale, yes. Based on the fact that we anticipated a prison sentence, yes, it's for sale. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
There we go.
Okay, so that was the comments from Jodi's lawyer. What timestamp are we at right now? Are we at 2:27?
Yep.
Okay, so the next part of this that we're going to watch by popular demand is...
By popular demand.
Adam Paulsteed, who was interviewed on Mormon Stories for his personal experiences, very traumatic experiences with Jodi and her professional context as a therapist. He also attended this hearing, which I'm glad. I hope that this was, doesn't take away or fix anything that she did to Adam and his family specifically, but maybe I hope it was a little validating or in some way that now she's going to prison, even if it wasn't for something that, she should have been the first time. But anywho, and so because he was there, he was also around when they were doing interviews of the attorney. And so he hung around and basically grabbed the mic and was like, hey, you want to know about Jodi? I'll tell you about Jodi. And a lot of people were, what's the word I'm looking for? Yes, this was the guy that was also abused in Boy Scouts, and him and his family, his dad in particular, were able to help get the laws changed in Idaho around like child abuse and statutes and limitations and things. And so he's great. And the unfortunate thing is, because of the stuff with his ex-wife, the Mormon Stories episode had to be pulled down due to what's going on like on that side of his life, like with the ex-wife and lawyer and judge and all that stuff. So I think the episode has since been taken down. And so this was an opportunity for him to tell a little bit of his story, and I think he deserves to have the platform to do it. I hope he doesn't get in any trouble for this. Some people were saying he was kind of disjointed and whatnot in this. And
from what I have seen of him, that is just who he is.
It's a very emotional thing, and you're talking about
fine.
a traumatic experience. And so we're not going to police how he talks about these things. He's also had a lot of experiences with Jodi and a lot of trauma, and is trying to get as much out into the world as possible in a really short time frame. And so just keep that in mind as we watch this.
Okay. He's not Mormon anymore, right?
No, as far as I know.
Sorry, I was looking at chat. Did you mention that Mormon Stories had to take down his episode?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yep.
They're like,
okay, we've got another interview.
Do you guys want to know who Jodi Hildebrandt is? Here,
did they even know? They might not have even known who he was.
I think they did, because they updated the lower third right away. And so they must have known.
Like the ticker?
I'll answer your questions. He's her attorney. He can't answer them.
I mean, he's
My
not
name's
wrong.
Adam Paul Steed, and if you guys want to know who Jodi Hildebrandt is, I'll answer tons of questions about her. I know my dad. Hey, Dad, come here.
Honestly, though, this is probably so vindicating for him.
If they talked to him beforehand, then they also could have pulled information from him.
Come here. My dad has a file at home that's probably about 2,500 pages of records from court filings and just huge amount of documentation about Jodi Hildebrandt that we will share with everybody. I want you to know the same court that has ordered us not to share these documents is covering up this racket that Jodi Hildebrandt had with the Mormon Church in the 4th District Utah County Court. She abused my children the same way, almost, even in a different type of abuse. I think it could be argued worse. And that was 15 years ago. And I fought against Jodi Hildebrandt with my family and everybody to stop this monster of a lady. And Jodi went after me. She went after me to destroy my life in the craziest way you could ever think of possible. Like, I was a victim of sexual abuse at Boy Scouts of America, Camp Little Lemhi in Idaho. And my dad helped us stop a predator. You can read it in the national press and everything. We changed the laws of sexual abuse so victims could come forward. We got rid of the criminal and civil statute limitations. The Mormon Church knew who we were. And Elder Helam, Richard G. Helam, was he was the president of the First Quorum of the 70, the top probably executive functioning leader of the whole Mormon Church. And
oh my God, he is putting them on blast. I love this. I want to buy this man a drink if he will accept it. I would love to buy this guy a drink.
He sat with Jodi Hildebrandt as they destroyed my life in this court racket, like they've destroyed countless other people's lives. And they even had the gall to order my Mormon Stories thing where I brought some documentation off the internet saying that they didn't want me to say bad things to my children or in front of the children about my ex-wife. Well, if you're accused of sexual abuse by Jodi Hildebrandt, and if your ex-wife performed a falsification of sexual abuse, that professionals looked at the documentation and said, this is sexual abuse. This is sexual abuse. We have documentation for sexual abuse of my children.
I'll also add to this, because I'm a therapist in Utah, and Jodi obviously has come up as part of just discussions that we've been having as therapists. I had heard from a colleague who had worked with previous clients of Jodi where it was common for Jodi to conceptualize watching pornography as literal abuse. And so she would tell spouses, your husband is abusing you, your husband is abusing your children because he's looking at pornography once a month. And so that's the kind of conceptualization that Jodi was giving in these situations. And so she was just flippantly using these words that do not need to be trivialized in any sense, and just applying them in situations where they are not accurate, are not appropriate, and are entirely just, I mean, as a therapist, it's just an unethical narrative to push on someone. If somebody believes that and that's a problem for them and that's valid and they can get out of their marriage, and that's totally fine. But for a therapist to push that sort of narrative onto a client, if that's not what they believe, that is extremely harmful.
Yeah.
Extremely harmful.
Well, I can't imagine any sort of context where pushing any narrative like that, regardless of whether they believe it or not, is ethical.
Right. I mean, it's not your job to push things like that onto clients. It's your job to help them process where they are at. You meet them where they are. Like, you can give them information, but you don't give them your personal opinion on what it means when someone's viewing pornography. Like, especially when we have so much stigmatization and shame attached to sexual behavior in Mormonism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Anyway.
Well, reminder, Adam Paul Steed is the one that got Jodi's license put on probation.
Yes. So he was the one back in 2012 where she had contacted the university, and he had gotten expelled, or whatever the term that they use is. She breached that confidentiality and got him disciplined, and he inevitably had to leave school. So that's
Adam Paul Steed is a former client of Jodi. Him and his ex-wife went to counseling with Jodi.
By Jodi Hildebrandt and my ex-wife, and this stuff was redacted in the Doppel paperwork. It was so horrible that it was redacted, and the courts just recently said I couldn't talk about my family or my ex-wife or anything. But if you have children,
Miku's headphones brings up a good point. He was a senior, so over 3 years of credits that can't transfer. Not only that, but being someone who has tried to transfer credits from a CES BYU school, but not only is that 3 years of untransfer credits that you can't transfer, that it wouldn't even really transfer that much, because BYU is like atrocious with making you take dog water courses that have no real world analog, and other universities won't give you credit for. So
yep.
Your children were trained to think that your dad was sexual predator and a monster.
So I'm sorry, we came in a little bit late. Why is it that you wanted to be here?
Okay, so there are tons, and it's not Jodi Hildebrandt is the tip of the iceberg. The Mormon Church was doing this operation where they were using religious beliefs and they were using ethical therapy.
Oh, another victory lap for Adam, because Sarah Safe Word brought it up. Essentially, because of his case, the entire class action lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America for all the sexual abuse that was covered up was able to happen. So
yeah, and I mean,
shout out.
Yeah, straight up.
To enforce them, and it was an area of exploitation, and it was a horrific area. It was exploitation because it created horrible divorces that should have been normal divorces. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of families going through these courts, and Jodi was like an icon. Her doctrine. Okay, so here's the problem. Everybody.
So today it sounds like was a little bit of like justice for you too.
Oh, Jodi, yeah, Ruby Frank. When I saw Ruby Frank, I saw my ex-wife sitting there saying the exact same thing. My ex-wife would have said the exact same thing Ruby Franke said today, and a lot of other women would have said the same thing. You have no idea how many victims are out there that their minds have been messed up so much with this. The prosecutor said that he said that the children thought it was their fault. All of the adult men think it's their fault. All of the women think it's their fault. I have had countless emails and messages.
Sorry, what was your name?
I'm Adam Paul Steed. I'm the guy that got Jodi's license from Doppel.
Come on,
removed.
ABC4.
Well, my dad and mom
get it
the
together.
Credit. But and they said that the Doppel department said we have evidence here for criminal charges against Jodi. This is 13 years ago. It's like.
So a reminder that Doppel is the Department of Professional Licensing in the state of Utah. So they're in charge of licensing for various professions that require like prerequisites that have to be maintained by the state. And so Doppel is in charge of licensing for therapists, counselors, social workers, psychiatrists in the state of Utah, and that's who he's talking about. And so this was something that he talked about at length in his Mormon Stories interview. Was a lot of the things that came up were things that were like criminal and inappropriate and Doppel recognized but couldn't do anything about.
Identical stuff. So I almost like fell over in the courtroom when I heard Jodi say that she loved those children. Jodi doesn't love children. Jodi's
you and
like
everybody
Ted
else,
Bundy.
dude.
In fact, one time I was in...
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. When you look at how much she charges.
Seriously.
Do you feel that she should have a longer sentence than...
Jodi, here's the problem. Somebody hits a person and runs. That's like two variables, a car and someone running. They catch them. Jodi's got like 30 variables, including a huge issue with the Mormon church racketing. I mean, they're all ducking low and covering. In fact, I looked at an email, and I can show this to you guys. This is factual evidence, where it should have been a neutral person in the courts. Kelly Peterson, the guardian ad litem, when they were punishing me in the family custody courts, he said that my act to turn Jodi Hildebrandt in was an act of vengeance, and they took my kids away from me. Because I performed an act of vengeance. That's in this court was sitting there completely in bed with Jodi. They've done it. I talked to Doug Thayer's daughter. She saw relationship.
I also want to remind people that haven't been here before that Jodi was a therapist that was sanctioned by the Mormon Church. Like, the Mormon Church has a list of providers, and they even have a therapy service, which
the family
LDS Family Services, which I can't tell you how many experiences I've heard about LDS Family Services that just enraged me. But she was basically condoned by the church. So like the church has a list of like selected people that are like, oh, if you need to go to a therapist, your bishop will recommend to go to this therapist because they're Mormon and they'll keep you in the church. And that's exactly what they're designed to do. Not all of them who work at LDS Family Services are terrible, I'm sure, but a lot of them are. And so Jodi was sanctioned.
Sorry, you cannot work for an organization that is that deeply in bed with other organizations and say that you're not living up to your charge.
Like, I have issues with BYU even being an accredited school for social work. That is my not therapist opinion, but my personal opinion.
Yeah.
When you enforce homophobic and transphobic practices, you should not be teaching social work, because oppression and marginalization is everything. It is literally the foundation of everything that you learn in social work. And so why are we supporting and training social workers at a school that continues oppression, continues like constant homophobia, transphobia, targeting people, like harassing, like
that offers no apologies for?
It should not even be a consideration.
It's racism or anything of that.
None of that.
nature.
Like racism is rampant within Mormonism, and that is something in social work that you, like, especially as like white women who are like there's a lot of white women in social work, like the fact that there is even accreditation available for a social work program at BYU, I take major issue with.
Yeah. But not only, that also brings up the other point, not only did Jodi break confidentiality to contact the school and allege that he had been acting in contrary to the honor code that they uphold, but the institution also accepted that breaking of confidentiality and acted on the information that was given them, because she was, and I can't say for sure if this is the case, but she was a trusted source because she worked for LDS Family Services or was a referral thereof.
And we talked about this with the MLM video that we did not that long ago, like the automatic assumption that Mormon equals trustworthy. Like, this is why these things happen. This is why these therapists are successful, because it's like, oh, if you go to a Mormon therapist, they're going to be a good person. They're going to be good at their job.
They're going to keep you in the church. They're going to help you live upstanding lifestyle that's correct in the eyes of God.
Well, and it's common within Mormon culture, especially if you have like younger people who are wanting to go to therapy, their parents will be like, no, you have to go to a Mormon therapist, because they're worried that if they see like a secular or a non-religious therapist, that they're going to encourage them to leave the church, which is not ethical of anybody to do. But if somebody's processing whether or not they want to stay, like, it's your point, it's your job to meet them where they're at. Like, my job isn't to convince people to leave the church. Like, that's highly unethical behavior. But that's the like presumption of people, especially culturally in Utah, is that if I don't send my child to a Mormon therapist, or we don't see a Mormon therapist, we're going to get divorced or we're going to leave the church. And that's like the thing that's hanging, I think, over these couples' heads, is the looming divorce, and Jodi takes advantage of that.
Exactly. Crumbly's Corner, I completely agree. There should be no MSW, MFT programs at any religious colleges, bar none, period. You do not need to be, you can go to a secular college for an education like that.
Don't go to a Christian school for any kind of counseling.
There is so much damage that has been done by religion, the world around. I cannot think that anybody would, I don't think anybody should be okay with that. Anyway. Are we on full screen right here?
These aggressive attorneys working with Jodi, Commissioner Patton. All these people know about Jodi. The BYU Honor Code office before they kicked me out of school for being a whistleblower on child abuse, I guess. Jodi Hildebrandt went there and told them I was the most dangerous man she'd ever met in her lifetime. We have hundreds of pages of this stuff of Jodi Hildebrandt working with top church leaders to
I mean, did nobody there think, oh my God, Jodi is saying that this is the most dangerous person that she's ever seen in her life, and they're coming to the fucking BYU Honor Code office to tell us this? Go to the police!
Well, and you can see why the Mormon Church is going to duck and hide in this situation, because they have a lot on the line here. Like, they endorsed Jodi. They had her on lists. They promoted her. She spoke at events. Like, you know, she was as Mormon could be. And so they had a mutually beneficial relationship with Jodi. Like, you send me clients, I keep them in the church. Like, that's highly unethical if they don't want to, like, stay.
A lot of times the church will use funds appropriated through bishoprics in wards to pay for sessions.
So she was practically on the church's payroll. And historically, I've seen it done a million different ways. Like, sometimes it's direct from the church, sometimes it's a check written by the bishop. Like, it's different. But she was literally, I mean, she's practically on the church's payroll.
Yep.
They're complicit.
Not okay. Not okay.
Well, I got kicked out of school my senior year. This lady, we've got all this documentation of how she talks, how she walks. Now, here's what I do want to say. I don't like Ruby Franke, but I don't know her. I just think you have to be a selfish person to fall for Jodi's stuff. She's got a certain kind of carrot that gets certain kind of people. But Ruby Franke would have never done any of this stuff if Jodi Hildebrandt hadn't been the mastermind and just completely created this. Ruby Franke's not...
I don't know that I entirely agree with that.
Yeah, no.
I think Ruby was on a track that she could have slowly gotten worse on her own, and who knows what she was doing. Again, because we only saw what she portrayed. We saw the image that she procured for everyone on her YouTube channel. So we did not see if there was any further abuse that was happening. Only the kids and her know if there was something beyond that. But I think...
And even then, the mask was not very far.
Jodi just emboldened and fast-tracked her. I think Ruby was already on a path, but I think Jodi got her there quicker.
Dangerous in the sense she's not going to go out and do this to more kids, but Jodi Hildebrandt will. When we went to Doppel and we went to Doppel ordered her to go through all this ethical stuff. She went through the whole thing with shining colors, and she turned around and did the same stuff again. I mean,
he's right. She completed, when you are on probation or when you're getting disciplined by the state. The thing about Doppel is all of that is public information. So the hearings, the requirements, everything is public. And so she had a list of requirements that were set forth by Doppel that she had to check off and complete in order to get her license reinstated, so she wasn't under probation or discipline anymore. And she did all of those things. She checked every box. She did everything. She did everything that they told her to do. And so she was back on track exactly the way that she was supposed to. Like, she followed all the rules. She didn't break any rules. She didn't skip anything. But what does this say? Is this concerning behavior that needs to be monitored further? Like, I'm not saying Doppel did anything wrong here, but I think it leads up to a different conversation around, like, do we have a different methodology, or do we have a different way to monitor these people who have committed unethical infractions of this caliber? Because, there's some people who make mistakes, and people are human, and that happens. But this is not one of those things where it's like, oh shit, I really screwed up. This is intentional. I am literally violating my client's confidentiality that I am sworn to protect. That's not an oopsie, generally. Like, sometimes people send emails and things, and that's not okay either. But this was a very intentional, unethical behavior to be making, like in the degrees of things, right? Because in therapy school, like they always tell you, number one rule when I graduated with my MSW was don't have sex with your clients. Like that was all the focus. And there's people who don't even get their license taken away for sleeping with clients, and that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But is
Ultimately,
this something that we should have taken more seriously, that should have drawn more attention, that maybe should have put her on a more long-term track of monitoring before they let her off the hook? And I'm not saying Doppel did anything wrong. I mean, they hold my license, so I'm not saying the Doppel did anything wrong here. But
at the very least, it doesn't reflect on them very
could we do something
well.
like that's what I'm wondering is there something that we could have done better? Like, is there something that
is that something that happens a lot, sex with clients? I feel like everybody has a story.
I don't want to say a lot, but I think it happens more often than people think. And it, there are situations where, like in couples counseling, where Jodi like spent more time with one individual in the couple, like she's having like long drawn out sessions with women. Like I think that was something that Adam talked about. It was like you go to her for couples therapy, but then she's meeting with the wife individually, like regularly. That's an immediate red flag. Like if you're seeing her for couples and she's starting to see them individually, like that's a red flag for ethical behavior, and sometimes for unethical behavior. And sometimes that's how things happen, right? Like it's normal, like we call it erotic transference, and it's something that happens in therapy sometimes where like clients have feelings towards you or you have feelings towards clients, but it's a normal human thing to feel attraction to another person, but it's your job as a professional to monitor that and to work it out in supervision and to seek consultation so that doesn't interfere with your ability to work with the client. And if it does, then you refer that client out to another provider so it doesn't become a problem. And that's usually what happens. Is a lot of times these erotic transference cases develop into like more than that. They develop into full-fledged relationships, and like Jodi's meeting with clients at night and like late at night and by themselves, and like that's scary behavior. That's unethical behavior. And so I'm not saying it never happens. I'm not saying it always happens, but it is something that does happen.
And even when she was teaching us that we were safe to come to her and stuff, she was abusing children at the same time with one hand and teaching a godliness with another hand.
So what's her motivation?
Jodi Hildebrandt had a weird relationship with my ex-wife. It was a dual relationship. It was bordering sexual in nature. I mean, she went through different women that made her look powerful and important. My ex-wife's dad was an Area 70 in the Mormon church. And Jodi Hildebrandt wanted power, but I know her instincts. When you're in a pain and suffering, when you talk about something and she finds a way to hurt you, it makes her blush. It makes her feel euphoric. I've seen her act that way and look that way in the worst of circumstances. So I always compare Jodi Hildebrandt to Ted Bundy, because nobody can figure out why a serial killer would kill people. Jodi Hildebrandt, she grows off of people's pain and destruction. And when she sat there and said she loved those kids, I almost fell out of my chair. The only thing her version of loving children is find a way to make them hurt more than anything possible. It's like an energy she feeds off of.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah.
All right. All right now.
There was something else.
Yeah, we don't speculate on sexual orientation or
that
sexual
is Adam's
relationship.
experience, and we're not going to invalidate that.
That's his opinion, and he obviously was a lot closer than us. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong.
I mean, it's just a boundary violation. If you have anything more than a professional relationship with your therapist, major red flag. And there's a difference between like having a good therapeutic relationship, like where you can laugh and you can make jokes and like you have a strong trust developed with your therapist. There's a difference between that and like a highly inappropriate, and so you have
That's his opinion.
You've got to find the line, right?
It's more personal for him. Some Mama Jama said it's not over.
Oh, it's not.
Oh,
I can't remember. I watched so much footage today.
I didn't watch this yet, so this is the first time seeing.
Sorry, I didn't. It's a little traumatic for me, so if I monologue, I'm sorry. Does anybody have a question?
Thanks for.
Covered a lot.
We got a ton of documentation. That 4th District Court's got to be ducking their heads right now, because I do want to say something. There's countless children out there that have been raised to believe their fathers are predators because of Jodi Hildebrandt. And the 4th District Court and other courts involved don't want to show they made mistakes. So who's going to help those children? Like, who's going to help them? Like, this is a court of public opinion. People need to find out the truth to go help all these children and help all these people come forward. And the fact that the court tried to silence me for being on the front edge of coming forward is just an example of how the same notorious people in power back then that allowed Jodi to do all this stuff are alive and thriving today. And if you give a damn about our children, you got to do the same thing I do and fight for what's true.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you, Adam. That was.
Let's go.
He's solid. I mean, it's totally true.
I hope he walked out of these doors and he clicked his damn heels, because he deserves that.
Well, and how, like, I know John from Mormon Stories did another interview with another guy who went to Jodi for couples counseling, and similar narratives, similar things, similar experiences. Like, she has a pattern, and how many, like, characterizing a father as a predator or characterizing the dad in any of these situations as somebody who's unsafe for children without any proof or like validity to that statement at all is horrifying. Like, that is, I mean, that is, in my opinion, license revoke immediately. Like, that is so harmful, and the damage that she's done, I mean, I completely agree. I think we're on the tip of the iceberg with Jodi, honestly. I don't know that we'll ever truly get to the bottom of everything that she did, because she did things so quietly, and there's so much shame attached to these experiences. I mean, who wants to come forward and say, oh yeah, hey, me and my wife went to couples counseling because I was struggling with pornography, and then she left me because Jodi told her to? Like, who wants to talk about that? Like, that sucks. Like, people going to couples therapy is a very vulnerable experience, and you should be able to share that in the manner in which you choose, if you share it with other people at all. And so it makes sense why she created this scenario where there's so much shame attached to it that she basically secured her job. Like, she has job security because she knows that people aren't going to speak out on these things because there's so much shame attached to it and they're embarrassed. Like, she literally created her job security by entering an area where people don't want to vulnerably and publicly talk about these things.
Yeah.
And then just continue to perpetuate that culture, which is just mastermind levels of manipulation.
I mean, it's kind of like an extension of how the Mormon Church operates in the same topic. Is you create this narrative of, well, this is immoral, it's reprehensible in God's eyes, and you cannot approach God and repent by yourself when you have committed sins like this. You have to go through our authorized people, and they will tell you the method that you can obtain your repentance for this great sin. And then you feel this great shame. You have to approach somebody about it. You have to publicly not participate in the same things that everybody, all of your peers and your family are participating in.
Yep.
And it creates this huge shame where you either keep going back to that, because, I mean, it is a behavior that a lot of us, we just end up doing, especially when we are maturing in our teen years, and you're at a very vulnerable point in your life. You have to go and talk to this adult man about your issues with viewing pornography or whatever. And then you either fall into a cycle of having to go back and talking to them about it, or you buckle down, you shut up, and you lie about it. So it's just kind of the same concept. Jodi just found a way to make it worse and make money off of it.
Somebody asked if sex addiction is a thing in the DSM. Here in the DSM, as it currently, the most updated version, it's not. And many professionals in this field, and the ones that I work adjacent to, like my current supervisor has her PhD in like sex therapy, and it's not, sex addiction isn't identified as a thing in the DSM. We talk about it as, and I think Melissa put this in the chat too, we talk about this as like compulsive behaviors or out of control sexual behaviors. And so there's a difference between, hey, I watch porn once a month and my partner doesn't like that, which is valid, and like, I'm compulsively watching so often that it's impacting my ability to maintain my job. Like, there's a difference. It's not to say that like sex and things of that nature can't ever become compulsive and out of control, because they can. But Utah's characterization of you watch porn once a month means you have a sex addiction is rampant. And they have programs here that are facilitated by non-therapists who peddle that narrative all the time. Like, can't tell you how many times like therapists in the field in Utah will get people who come to them and say, I have a sex addiction. And when they press on it and are like, okay, tell me what that means. It's like, yeah, well, I watched porn like 3 times last month. And you're like, oh my gosh. And that's like the shame attached to it is exactly the church manufactures this narrative, pushes it on to certain people who are willing to peddle it. And then it just causes so much trauma. It causes trauma for married couples who are trying to enter, like Mormon married couples who are trying to have a healthy sexual relationship. It impacts teenagers. It impacts individuals. Like, it impacts everyone on the spectrum of like humanity. And it's just absolutely concentrated shame.
Yeah. Melissa says, or my personal favorite, I spent all the rent money on porn. If you find yourself in that position, maybe you could be characterized as such. Right.
Then you've got, like, we know it's a problem. When it's impeding, like, your social and occupational functioning, then it's something that needs to be discussed. But it is, and if it's a problem for you and you don't want to be doing it all, then that's a conversation that you have with your therapist. But it's not characterized as a sex addiction if you do it every once in a while. You know, when it just causes people tremendous harm to think that that's what they have.
Yeah. Grace said it's equated to murder. Yes, the Book of Mormon characterizes sexual sin as next to murder, but slightly beneath the totally, terribly awful sin of denying the Holy Ghost.
Indeed. So. Okay, so we talked about this already, so go to the prison ones that I had. Go to this one, yeah. So interestingly, as we continue to talk about this, there were some other things that I wanted to hit on. I wanted to hit on the religious services that are provided at the jail. So we'll talk more, or at the prison. We'll talk more about the prison in a minute, and I'll kind of show you what it looks like because it's brand new and it's really interesting. But there are religious services offered at many prisons. This isn't like a unique to Utah thing, but I thought it was interesting that as part of the religious services at the bottom of this paragraph, it says that volunteers also provide religious-based addiction recovery groups, which I'm here for, love it, and LDS family home evening group, which is really interesting. Which family home evening is basically just a church-sanctioned night where you're supposed to spend time with your family on like church-based stuff.
It's kind of wild that they call it that because
it is wild.
Even when I was attending BYU Idaho, they pivoted away from calling what essentially was family home evening group. They pivoted away from calling it like that for whatever reason. I have no clue.
Yeah.
But that they still do it in prison is kind of interesting.
It's interesting. And then they talk about a variety of programs offered at the state's 2 prisons rely on volunteer help, including the following. And so they recognize the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as volunteers who help maintain and facilitate these programs. And so there is like...
Damn, they were just asking us to clean the church, but now they're going to have to clean the prison? I'm just kidding.
Who knows?
That's just...
So I'm all for people using religion as a coping mechanism, something that gives them hope, something that gets them through their day. Like, I have nothing against people who use religion as part of their structure of life and values. But it is interesting when you think about the implications of this case specifically and Mormonism and how Ruby is probably going to use this to her advantage as part of her case and probably appealing to the parole board when you're like, you know, I've been involved in all the volunteer programs. Like I go to all the church meetings. I go to the family home evening group. Like that's going to be very appealing to them. And so there's also lots of other things that they do on here. I like that they have the substance use programs. Canines with a cause. Like
I'm
it
interested.
sounds like they have some interesting things going on here.
Can we get felines with a cause?
Right. So go to the next slide. This is the Utah State Correctional Facility in Salt Lake. So this opened at the end of 2022, if I recall correctly. And I took this photo because it's massive.
It's gigantic.
It is huge. And this is, McKay looked it up because I told him it wasn't far from the airport, but it is like right by the airport.
Yeah, it's like if you're going on I-80 westbound, it's after the airport, after the other like hotels and shit, but before the Great Saltaire and that area over there. So it's like
it's brand new.
Yeah, and it's like right off of the lake bed basically.
Yeah.
Which is pretty,
so
it's in the marshy area.
This is brand new.
That's
like
drained now.
It's been labeled as like a state-of-the-art facility because there's lots of like modern updates compared to, I mean,
look at this. This area is just like marshland surrounding
there's nothing
it. And
green
it's
over there.
super salty. Like it's where the lake bed used to come up to, but
the salt
the
lake's not
green
far from
ass
this.
like golf
looks like golf course
lawn
grass,
is pretty wild.
Okay, so go to the next one. If you click on the W there,
What?
it pulls up. So this is the little like
Whoa.
animated
Virtual tour. Dell.
It doesn't show you much. It paused to refresh it real quick because it stopped on you for some reason. It goes like all the way around. Why does it stop there?
The what?
Scroll down a little. Oh, see,
Oh,
there it goes. So it gives you kind of like a little.
Wow.
It's not much, but it gives you, this is the women's building for the general population. They also have a max security for women as well. So my understanding, I haven't done too much research onto this, but my understanding is if you have like an accomplice in a crime, you can't be in the same prison, or at least in the same area. So I'm wondering if Jodi or Ruby, at least one of them, is not going to be able to be at this prison specifically. So only one of them is going to be. If I were to guess, it would be Ruby, because I would guess that she would leverage that she's going to try to have relationships with her children who are in Utah, whereas Jodi's children are adults. And as far as we know, don't really like her much. And so I don't know the details on that. Maybe they can be. I thought maybe they'll just put one of them in max security. Like maybe that's not like super what they're supposed to do, but maybe that's what they will do. But they could also just pop them in different, they could pop them in different areas. They could put her somewhere else. So who knows how that's going to pan out. I guess we will see. She could even be, one of them could even go out of state. So who knows?
That would be interesting. I'm interested on how that works.
I am too. And I don't even know if there's really a method for it other than like they can't obviously be, but they obviously did something because they're in the same small jail together.
Yeah.
So maybe it is more realistic because this prison is a lot bigger.
Yeah. They would probably have to put Jodi in maximum security.
So I don't know how that would work. I guess we'll find out. It probably won't be long now since more information is going to come out, but I don't know when they transfer them or when they get moved from the jail to the prison or anything. I assume that information will come out at a later date. And then Miku's headphone said they might not be considered co-conspirators anymore since there's no trial. That's also true. Maybe they can be in the same facility since them talking would do no harm to like a trial.
Yeah.
That's a fair point too.
It might be once that however many month period where they had to file paperwork. I don't remember what it was. These would be good questions for Natalie Lawyer Chick. Shout out, go over to her,
Natalie.
subscribe and stuff like that. She would know these.
Which also reminds me that you should subscribe right now if you aren't subscribed to our channel, because we would love to have you come back more often. We make lots of fun content that I think you would enjoy.
A lot of non-fun content
and
too,
a lot
but
of
interesting nonetheless.
Less like our MLM video. We did a video on the connection between MLMs and Mormonism a few weeks ago. So make sure you smash the like button. That increases our reach, and go check out our other videos. We have a whole playlist on Jodi and Ruby if you're just getting into this and need some background. Back before everybody was covering them, like there's people who've been covering it longer than we have, but we were just covering them as a like, what the hell is wrong with these people and what the hell is wrong with Ruby before things like really went haywire. So there's that. And then thank you for those of you who hit the like button already. You can become a member, join our Patreon if you're interested.
Shout out for the King Supers ad. Shout out King Supers.
Do we want to chat about mental health stuff real quick?
I think we should do that real quick to round out what we were going to talk about tonight, this evening.
Okay, so we'll talk about mental health stuff real quick because I put this together just for these purposes. So something that I want to make very clear is, play back on me real quick. Something I want to make very clear before I talk about this is I am not Jodi's therapist. I have never been her therapist. I've never worked with her. I've never done assessments on her. I've never done anything with Jodi. So because I'm a therapist, have an ethical responsibility not to diagnose people who are not my clients. So I cannot diagnose Jodi and be like, oh my God, she's a narcissist. Oh my God, and I hate that term anyway. So I'm just giving that clarification right now that I can't diagnose Jodi. But what we can do is look at behavior just in terms of like general human behavior and go, oh, this is like Red flaggy behavior. It's not necessarily someone's a narcissist, but they might have some narcissistic traits. Normal, highly functioning people have narcissistic traits. So let's just be clear on that. But I wanted to give some clarity because people have asked me about like the idea of a sociopath and personality disorders and things. So I wanted to add some clarification to this conversation. So that's my disclaimer. So the three that I've been asked about the most are the following. So we've got narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. So these are all cluster B personality disorders, and they are less common than your typical like depression and anxiety. But these are the things that people ask me about when they talk about Jodi's behavior. So I included the incidence rate for the general population based on some studies specifically for each of these disorders. So when everybody's like, oh my God, my ex is a narcissist, do they act like a narcissist? Maybe. Do they have narcissistic traits? Sure. Are there exceptions to this rule and there are actual narcissistic people with narcissistic personality disorder out there? Absolutely. But I just wanted to put this in perspective with the incidence rate. So between 1 and 5% of the population, based on some research, has narcissistic personality disorder. So it is not as common as people think it is. But do some people have narcissistic traits? Without a doubt. Does your ex probably have some? Without a doubt. But it is, frankly, way, way, way less common than people think it is. And it's also more common in men than we see in women. But it does happen to women also. We also have borderline personality disorder, which presents as actually more common in women based on statistics. And it's a little bit higher, but 2 to 5% of the population has borderline personality disorder. And then antisocial most often about when it comes to Jodi, because this is like the essentially the proper term now that we use for the word sociopath or like some people would say psychopath, right? So it kind of falls along the lines of the antisocial personality disorder spectrum. There's sociopathic behaviors, psychopathic behaviors. Like we don't traditionally use those words really anymore in the profession because they're highly stigmatizing and they don't really describe behavior as clearly because they've become kind of pop psychology terms. But antisocial personality disorder, which is what a lot of people speculate that Jodi has, incidence rate is extremely, extremely low. Like 0.6% to 3% of the population, according to some research that I found, has a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. So antisocial personality disorder can be thought of as like the proper kind of umbrella term or spectrum of like sociopathic behavior. Antisocial personality disorder is also way more common in men. It's not to say that women don't have it, but it is significantly, I think it's like 3 times incidence rate more common for men. And the interesting thing about ASPD is you have a significantly like clinical risk of increase for potential violence. And so particularly we see that in like when they do research on like the prison population and male inmates, there are a lot of male inmates who meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. And women with ASPD can also be violent. There are also people who have all of these who are also not violent. There are people who have antisocial who have never been violent and don't have any violent tendencies in their life. And so I just wanted to put this into perspective a little bit. It's also common for people to have these things, especially like borderline. Borderline is more common comparatively to the other two, to have normal high functioning lives. Like people can get on medication, people can go to therapy. These are disorders, personality disorders that can be coped with a lot of effort, right? And so, but I wanted to put in perspective instance wise, like, is it possible? Sure. I mean, it's possible. But does it mean that it's likely? I don't know. And also we don't have a lot of information because the thing that we have to keep in mind with social media is everything that Jodi and Ruby have put out there is curated for their audience.
Yeah, growing there.
Right? So the information that we have about, you know, these women are just the parts of themselves that they have decided to display to the world. And so we don't see, like generally speaking, we don't see what Adam has seen. We don't see what other victims of Jodi have seen. We only see what the two of them have decided to put out there. And so even like making a diagnosis based on that would just be like horribly inaccurate and unethical because I'm giving a diagnosis to this like small part that she's put on the internet that I can see.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's not to say, and this is why I wanted to talk about this, because there's a lot of stigmatization attached to things like antisocial personality disorder and things. And so it's not to say that these people can't live normal lives. It's not to say that they aren't functional in all aspects. They have jobs, they have relationships. They just might have more obstacles in their way. They might have had more to cope with, more to learn from, things of that nature. And so I wanted to just put that in perspective. Like, is it possible that she has any of these things? Sure, it's possible. Does she have some of these characters? Does she have narcissistic traits and characteristics? I think she engages in some narcissistic behavior based on what we've seen. Does that mean she has narcissistic personality disorder? No, it doesn't. I don't see, generally speaking, when we're looking, if we isolate the behaviors that we've seen from Jodi, I don't see a lot of borderline stuff with her particularly. I think she has some narcissistic traits, and I think she might have, even, if we're speculating based on behavior, maybe there are some antisocial traits as well. But none of us have enough information to make any sort of diagnosis based on these things. And these are things that can be incredibly challenging for people to manage, and lots of people do it with proper treatment. And so it's not to say that if she did have these things that it justifies any of her behavior or it inhibits her from doing any of these things, other therapists in chat justifying, agreeing. I don't see borderline with Jodi. If you go to the next slide, I highlighted this a little bit. Again, there's my disclaimer on the bottom. This doesn't apply to all people who may have these. This isn't comprehensive. It's intended for educational purposes only. But when we look at empathy specifically, like a lot of people assign like, oh, they have no empathy. That means they're a sociopath. That means they're a psychopath, right? And so being completely devoid of empathy is an antisocial symptom. It also can be kind of a narcissistic symptom depending on where you are on the extreme, like on the spectrum of narcissistic personality disorder, right? So people with NPD generally have some empathy and can understand some feelings in others, but they don't care. Like, they can understand them and they can have them, but they don't generally care about them. Like, it doesn't impact them. They don't really feel the need to understand it or sometimes even acknowledge it. Whereas some people with borderline are more capable of acting like they have empathy or feigning empathy. And it's not to say that anybody who has any of these things like just doesn't have any empathy ever. Again, these are just kind of symptomology, kind of pathology type language when it comes to these things, just so you can have some clarity. But the things that I don't see with Jodi are like necessarily the constant need for validation from others, because I don't think she cares about other people's opinions, really, to be honest. And borderline is much more in touch with like really struggling with being alone. And I don't really see that with Jodi either. She kind of discards people when she's done with them, which sometimes is referred to as narcissistic supply, when people who have narcissistic personality disorder kind of latch on to people and then just kind of take from them. Like, they take the admiration, they take the happy feelings, they take some of these things and they're like, ooh, I want this. And so the relationship isn't truly like, oh, I have a good relationship with you, I care about you. It's you're providing me something and I'm taking that from you. And if you don't provide that for me anymore, then I really don't care. And so it's kind of like they discard people more easily, where, antisocial can also be you don't need anyone really. Like, you don't really care. You don't care to have relationships really. They don't really generally mean a whole lot to you. There's not a whole lot of appeal there. They might struggle with it. And then other therapists in chat adding other experience with borderline people is that they're super empathetic, but constantly overwhelmed by their own panic and pain that they have nothing left to give everyone else. Yeah. So like extreme burnout from, I talk with clients about like overextension of empathy, right? And so that's something to take into account. And then if you go to the next one, these are some of the primary characteristics of these things. Again, this does not apply to everyone and it's different, but so on the left, if we have narcissistic personality disorder, there's this thing that I talk about with Jodi all the time, which is a trait of narcissism is like a sense of entitlement. Like, I'm entitled to things. I demand things. People should give me things. Like, I'm very prideful. I might be arrogant.
I should be able to make a phone call and talk about how I'm being accused of things that is just bullshit.
Sure,
on the phone. It shouldn't be used against me.
So a possibly narcissistic quality, a narcissistic trait, doesn't mean she has it. A lot of times, easily bored factors in there too. That also sometimes comes up in antisocial. The thing with narcissism is sometimes there's insight, sometimes there's not. I've seen both ways. So again, this isn't comprehensive. And then viewing relationships as objects for personal gain, and not like, I love you and I care about you and we have our not a transactional, but like a back and forth give and take relationship. It's like, what can you do for me?
Yeah.
So like if you think about it in terms of Ruby, what can you do for me? Oh, you can give me your following, you can give me,
mainstream
traction,
legitimacy,
validity, those kinds of things. And then in the middle, when we have borderline, you tend to see more of an extreme fear of abandonment. And that's not to say that can't be present with the other three, because it certainly can. Habitual lying, manipulative, sometimes impulsive, like with relationships, moving very quickly, making impulsive changes, like rapid mood changes. Again, I've seen these in the other two as well. This is just one example. And like very much dependent on others. Like, I need your validation. I need you to talk to me. I need you to give me these things, because it's like soothing, right? Like it's giving me a lot of times these things. The interesting thing about all three of these is they don't generally know from research what causes them. There is some research linking, like when we think about epigenetics and we think about the environment that you were raised in. And so a lot of these are some research that is starting to link to like attachment. A lot of things are attachment related. That's why we talk about secure attachment like as therapists so often, because it comes up so often. And so like your environment, child abuse, the way you were raised, the people who raised you, how they responded to your emotions, any kind of trauma, like these are all factors. And there's even some genetic factors that they're starting to explore, particularly with ASPD. They did a study not that long ago. I don't think it's been replicated yet, so take it with a grain of salt. But there was a study that they did that they found that people with ASPD had like more white matter in their brains. And so even just like neurodevelopmental, cognitively speaking, we might actually have some like legitimate brain differential changes in people with these things versus others. And then ASPD is kind of the more intense on the spectrum, right? Like they don't show any emotion. They're generally pretty cold. They're kind of non-engaged, easily bored, hesitates to accept any kind of personal responsibility, shallowness emotion-wise. And I think Melissa mentioned it in the chat, like empathy is not something that if you feel like you don't have it, that you can't learn it. Like I tell clients all the time that empathy is a skill. It can be learned, it can be improved on, it can be explored, it can be...
That's a good point.
Like it's not, like I think we've given...
It's not like an inherent...
Yes.
Innate quality in humans, necessarily.
Sure. And I mean, even if you think about like social skills and things, like there are people that struggle with certain things, and it's not because it's not inherent doesn't mean there's necessarily something wrong with you. It's just like, oh, this is a thing that I might need to develop further, that I might need to explore. So that's not something necessarily that is...
It's like kids. Like kids will bop you in the face, not because they want to hurt you, but because they don't realize that
what they're doing.
It's not pleasant. Because they're not having it done to them.
Exactly. Well, and then relationships from an ASPD spectrum are a lot of times like a callous disregard for other people. So like truly don't care about other people. And that's why they theorize that there's a higher incidence rate of people with ASPD and violence, because especially when they're interviewing like, male inmates and things, they have a higher tendency to commit like very violent crimes, like, homicides and things of that nature. And so it brings up a larger point of, why we have a disproportionate population of people with mental illness in prisons. Like that's another conversation, and why these things are happening and what we can be doing about them from like a, not just a rehabilitation standpoint, but what happens before kind of standpoint. And so again, I just point this out to give people more education in this area in a like very simplified way. Just to say that Jodi probably has, I think, things in all of these categories. Less so, in my opinion, from the borderline category, but I think she exhibits some of these behaviors in a bunch of different ways. And so it's not to say that, oh my God, she's a sociopath. It's, yeah, there definitely could be mental health things going on, but you nor I are in any kind of position to be like, oh my God, yeah, she's a psycho. And that's also like very stigmatizing and not helpful.
Because Jordan was psychotic at one point when she was postpartum.
Yeah, like I had postpartum psychosis, and that
she was not doing anything.
Yeah,
she was not doing anything that was even close to what.
No, a lot of times it is just delusion.
Jodi was doing.
Like, a lot of times it is just people with these things sometimes do live in an alternate reality, and in a reality that makes sense in their brains, and that's why I see when Jodi is completely convinced of these things, like it makes sense to me, because it's possible that she's constructed like this whole thing is like, this is my reality, and anybody outside of that like is irrelevant, because this is how I exist, this is my space, this is my reality, and it doesn't matter what you say. And then when you throw in religion into any of these things into the mix, can it be helpful? Yes. Can it be harmful? Also, yes. Can it be harmful from an extremism point, from a scrupulosity point? Like, oh, 100%. So I just wanted to give that as like extra information. So like, just monitor your language, because we don't want to trivialize any of these things for the people who do have them, or for people who have loved ones who have these, who it might be really hard, or they grew up with a parent who actually has narcissistic personality disorder, you know?
Yeah. I mean, even in our own chat right here, with the very tongue-in-cheek username, your favorite sociopath, with the $2 dono. Hey, I'm a woman with ASPD in our chat discussing Jodi Hildebrandt, and I have seen comments from this user that are very scathing and critical of what Jodi is doing. So it's not like you are incapable of participating in society or having relationships or anything. Ultimately,
and that's why I wanted to have this conversation.
Yes, ultimately, we are trying to pathologize humans, who are one of the most varied species on the fucking planet, due to our social tendencies and things like that. So,
well, there's lots of comorbidities with these, because, you know, even with, like, Sage just brought up autism, like, a lot of times we have, especially like autism presentation in women is very different, you know, and especially like growing up and things. So you have people who down the line are like, oh, I don't have ADHD, I actually have autism, or I don't have ASPD, I struggle with empathy because I struggle with these certain social skills, and that fits into the same category. And so,
or I think somebody had brought up that BPD was oftentimes misdiagnosed in females because they just didn't consider that autism was in the mix.
There's a lot of considerations to be made with how we, in my opinion, over pathologize in America. Like, a lot of times ASPD is diagnosed like a prerequisite. I'm not sure if it's still this way in the DSM, but I'm pretty sure a prerequisite for diagnosing somebody with ASPD is they had to have conduct disorder as a child, which conduct disorder is like, you know, you're being like a bad teenager, right? Like you're out committing crimes, you're doing things you're not supposed to be doing, you don't listen to your parents, you're very rebellious, like things of that nature. And so I don't know if that's still a prerequisite for ASPD. It might not be anymore. But that brings up the point, like, I mean, I have my own personal issues with conduct disorder, but what's going on? Because when we think about these things don't happen in a vacuum, what's happening here? Like, I'm going to act out if I don't have emotionally attentive parents. I'm going to act out if I have parents with a substance use problem. I'm going to act out if XYZ. And so sometimes there are, you know, like these camps, like they sent Chad to, even, are very quick to throw on like a label, like, oh, because you do XYZ, you have BPD or whatever. Like, sometimes they're just, in America, I think we're very quick to pathologize and diagnose things when there's much more nuance that I feel like that could be held. Baloney is just feeling very comfortable.
I'm sorry. I spotted him in the screen over there. I was like, okay, everybody needs this.
He's feeling
It's been
real
a
good
long
right now.
night. I see a lot of people are dropping out, and we appreciate everybody. It is a lot to talk about, so we appreciate everybody who is stuck around. Did you have anything more? I'm not trying to derail you.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, people with personality disorders aren't inherently evil or incapable of like interacting in society. Personality disorders are highly stigmatized. And that's, you know, there are things that cause this kind of behavior. We do remember, if we think back to when we read Jodi's book, Jodi did experience some child abuse, and she did experience child sexual abuse also, that from my understanding was not rectified or taken care of by her parents at all.
Yeah.
And so it's not to perpetuate the narrative that people who are abused go on to abuse people, but I think it is important to recognize that this is an aspect of it, because we don't know why people develop borderline. We don't know why people develop NPD or ASPD. Like, overall, we don't know. Like, we don't have like a solid, like, this is the reason. But when research starts to analyze it, we frequently come back to childhood, we come back to attachment, we come back to those experiences. And people, you know, who didn't have supportive parents, like, and I'm not just talking about like, you know, supportive parents, but I'm talking like substance usage to, you know, in an appropriate degree, or physical abuse, sexual abuse, those kinds of things, that's obviously going to leave an impact on a child. And so when we're talking about why these things happen, those are the things in research that we kind of always come back to. And so that's why there's lots of context and nuance to be had here. And, you know, in the future, maybe we'll get more brain science on why some of these things develop. But I think childhood and those experiences and like epigenetics and all those things are really important to think about.
Yeah, and the religious aspect, which seems to be playing a pretty...
And we don't want to perpetuate the narrative that if you were abused as a child, that you will abuse your own children, because that is not the case for everyone. There is some research out there that supports that, but there's research out there that supports a lot of things. It doesn't apply to everyone. Like I was abused as a child extensively, and I do not abuse my child in any way. And it is, you know, we talk about a lot of people of like our generation and older, and like some Gen X people who are breaking the cycle of the things that they learned from their parents and whatnot. And so you are not destined to, you know, abuse your own kids if you were abused. You might have to do some more work because things might be more triggering for you. You might need some therapy to process things that went on during your childhood. But overall, it is not like a set in stone thing that's going to happen.
Before we send off, I think there might be some questions in here that might not have gotten addressed, but just from our donations and everything that I said we would get back to, some we missed before we even started. Valkyrie, Crystal Martinez, Andrina, and Alyssa JK, all welcome to the Terrestrial Kingdom. We addressed the Tinkerbell with the 10 gifted. Welcome to all those people. And
Tori,
then Tori, celebrating 4 months. Welcome Taylor Page, Kaylee Shihai. Sorry for the pronunciation. I am making my best attempt. Welcome to the Terrestrial and Telestial Kingdom, respectively. And then Megan with the $5 dono. We appreciate you. That third super on a live stream, so shout out to you. And then Megan with the 9 months. Meant to put on my super chat that you'll have new with her mugshot on. Oh yeah, we have her mugshot on the beginning of this. So if you missed it, you can go back once we're done and hit it up with the rewatch crew. Then the boss lady, Shannon Pens, and Danica Paulos. Welcome to the Terrestrial Kingdom. Charlotte with the 5. Amazes me that people would be less angry with Ruby if she'd expressed no remorse. Yeah. I don't know. All these situations, it's hard to imagine how things would have played out differently because they didn't. So ultimately, it's kind of an exercise in futility. Who was sitting next to Kevin? I'm assuming it was the person with the brown hair. I don't know.
Recognize them. I don't know.
So sorry, Andrina, that we weren't able to figure that out for you. Ruby is absolutely cringe and hypocritical. Thank you, Sveta Art, for celebrating 1 month of membership. I hope the judge acknowledges her distancing herself from accountability in his sentencing speech. Yeah. I'm assuming this was during Ruby's statement. I don't know. I guess we'll see how that pans out. Unfortunately, it's going to be a long time before we really get any closure on that. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what the judge decides because his part is now done. It will now be AP and P.
Yeah, the parole board
that takes that up. So I don't know if they will watch like court recordings or anything like that.
I gotta switch positions, baloney.
Yeah, this is all new to me. Crystal celebrating 10 months. I need to look into jail life for Ruby and Jodi. That would be interesting. I wonder what kind of prison justice happens in Utah Women's Correctional Facility.
Will be interesting.
That'd be interesting. On a little side note, did you all hear about that fucking slug, Danny Masterson, and how he had to get moved to a different facility because all of the prison, I don't know if you call them gangs, the groups were absolutely rabid to take a swing at him, and he was scared to the point where he wouldn't leave his cell for meals. And then one day they finally were escorting him to go and get food because he was denying or like refusing to eat. And even with the escort, a couple guys jumped him, which is wild. So shout out to those guys because that guy is disgusting demon slug. Rest in piss whenever he finally croaks. April Chomp, welcome to the Terrestrial Kingdom. I see April all the time, so no stranger here. Hero Canton with the 50 gifted. Hero Canton is always doing too much. My brother was Adam Steed's home teacher in their BYU Married Ward before he started seeing Jodi. Oh my God. The 6 Degrees of Mormonism. And then your favorite sociopath with the 2 that I already read. Victoria Perry with the $2 dono. Blue Mondays, welcome to the Terrestrial Kingdom. I've been seeing Blue Mondays all over the comment section lately, so it's nice to see you here. Your favorite sociopath, also another dono. I'm pretty sure I developed ASPD because my dad locked me in a dog cage as a kid.
Oh my gosh, how traumatic.
But such is life is...
Well, you have a little bit of a sense of humor about it, which the dark humor I can appreciate. But my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
I would never be able to make a joke about that, but you are welcome to do so yourself.
Yes.
And then Tinkle Tits McGee, welcome to the Terrestrial Kingdom. Thank you for bearing with us at the end here.
Yes. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already. We love doing this, but
shout out everybody in chat
out
here
a lot when you subscribe and like the videos and drop us a comment before you leave. That always helps the algorithm. We have a new... We'll update you on the Ruby and Jodi case as we get more updates. At this point, you know, in 30 days, I assume we're going to have to make another video because more evidence is going to come out. So I assume that's going to happen, and I assume we'll be making another video about it at that point. We do have a Mormon influencer ballerina farm video coming out soon.
Yes.
So watch for that. And then you can join us always for our live streams. We live stream regularly on Tuesday and Thursday nights at 7:00 p.m. Mountain Time. So you can always join us there. But thank you for being here, for supporting us, for the super chats, for subscribing and being kind to us. There's lots of people who cover this stuff, and so we appreciate those of you that watch us, since we put a lot of work into this stuff, so I appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you for sticking with us, seeing it through, and for all the wonderful conversation everybody's been contributing. Although I, for sake of time, did not comment on everything. I did see a lot of awesome things in the chat the whole time. So thank you. Shout out replay crew.
Yes, Sims on Thursday.
God bless everybody. Sims on Thursday. Sorry we didn't get to it last week. It's just...
I've been having pain problems.
Yeah, honestly, Jordan she's done. She's like, take it out.
So my hysterectomy is next month.
Yep. So, anyway, we love you all. You're amazing. Oh, I got to show Babby. Let me show Babby real quick. Come here, Babby. Oh. Here he is.
Bobby.
The boy. Do you have a manifesto to speak to the people? He's trying to bunny kick the mic.
But I'll bunny kick the mic.
All right. We love y'all. Good night. And as always, the stream will be thank you. Bye.
Bye.